Oh,
Right.
but still, good news about talk radio. Did you hear?
Yeah, they're finally back. Oh, what? I mean, that was pretty disgraceful, actually. Infamous right wing site talk radio. But we're back with the Blob Watch, episode 17. It's a new year, and it's a new style of streaming. So there hasn't been apart from as Robert just mentioned a second ago, we haven't had much really news as such over the Christmas period, apart from like usual lockdown and nothing that I would say would stand out. And so I thought we'll do a bit of a fun one. So we'll be doing like a history stream, but we're actually going to be looking at revisionist history takes, which seem to be dominating. I guess our institutions, our education system, and our media figures, and as Douglas Murray put it, our hereditary historians in the media.
Oh, that was so good. For the last year, I've been calling Dan Snow proven liar Dan Snow because he was caught out in 2 massive whoppers last year. But I just think hereditary TV presenter is it's so elegant, and that's the thing about Murray. He's just so elegant with his language.
He is indeed. He is aristocracy. Is he not, Dan Snow? Well, kind of. He is David. He is of the Lloyd Georges.
Yes,
Dan Snow. If I'm not mistaken. So he had a pretty simple pass in, didn't he?
Yes, the thing about Dan Snow is that
I did like him a lot, by the way, when I was younger, like as a documentarian.
Well, there was that just shows the age gap between us, because you say when I was younger, and I just think, was him with his dad doing World War One just like 3 years ago? And you think probably not. It's probably more like a decade ago. But to me, it seems like that was very recent. That was okay when he did World War, great battlefield walks with his dad
and his castle stuff. That was pretty. And
good. I mean, he can do that kind of infographic kind of history.
But his dad wouldn't allow him to effectively bullshit the audience, though. I don't think, because I think his father was a better historian. Like he didn't come across like trying to push a narrative. And I watched now there's two historian Dans. You've got Dan Jones and Dan Snow. Now Dan Jones, I've had a run-in before. He is he is a supposed historian, historical expert on the Crusades. That is something that I mean, he knows a lot about like technical stuff, but he and Dan Snow have this really, really bad habit of, to formulate an argument, they deliberately jump from one crusade to the other. So so to make an argument of how bad the Christians were and how unjustly if they were to attack the Seljuks in the First Crusade, they draw examples from the Third and the Fourth Crusade. And
why are we in a world where we're arguing about the morals of the Crusade still?
Yeah,
we don't need to. No, my point here would be it's over. The question's done. It was over 1,000 years ago. Look, everything. History is one of the most vital things to know, but we should not be having to still argue the morals of the Crusades. Because their thinking is so separated from the way we think today. We wouldn't be able to conceive their justification for it.
Well, I accept that, but one thing I do take great exception is they and this is one of the podcasts, and it was a 40-minute podcast. I can only watch 10 minutes of it because I was walking my dog at the time, and when I was walking along, I just kept on swearing to myself and people passing me by, thinking that I was obviously must have been deranged or something. But I was listening to it, and then it was the bit where they talked about the Seljuk Turks and saying, now supposedly right-wing figures like Bannon and such would suggest that the Seljuk Turks did this, and I was like, okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Why are you making this political? It's history, for God's sake. This is you can't. Why would you connect the Crusades to something to events which are happening today from a political standpoint?
I don't know. They have this really. I mean, I think this is. I mean, I think it's their establishment-esque ism coming through, but they use the first 10 minutes to bash Steve Bannon. And from what I understand, Steve Bannon has talked about the Crusades in the past. They accused him of using the essence of the Crusades to suggest that there is this great conflict, this great cultural conflict with Christendom and Islam. From what I've seen of Steve Bannon, he has only ever talked about the strategies and tactics and the individual, I guess you could say, princes, dukes, and barons that took part in it. He's never really talked about the conflict between the two cultures. And I mean, in fact, he's actually been quite upfront and honest about the political divide, say, in the First Crusade between the Byzantine Emperor and the Norman Sicilians, and the sort of dynamics between those two, because they weren't allies, but they were on the same team.
In Christendom, everyone's on the same team.
Here's the thing. Do you think when they put the pitch in, let's do this show about the Crusades, the pitch was, right, we have to refute Bannon. And so so that's the crux. The crux is to put out a show that's against Bannon. That's the main point. There's no other reason to make a show talking about the Crusades other than that. And that everything after those 10 minutes, everything else is just filler.
Yeah. I think it was quite interesting because they were establishing it in the first 10 minutes. But the way that they established it was they were trying to, I guess you could say, manipulate the audience, because when it comes down to it, when you talk about the Crusades, you do have to accept that there is a significant difference between Christendom and the Islamic world at that time period, especially in like 1090s.
Well, the Christendom would have seen Islam at that time as a heresy. And Islam would see Christendom as a heresy. So you kind of both of them just despise each other. And that's not even to talk about what the Turks had just done to most of Byzantium.
Yeah, and that's the key point, because one thing I've found, which is, again, this is something that a lot of revisionists love to deliberately, and it is deliberate. Either they're just ignorant, but I think it's deliberate. Yes, because they say, when they talk about the Crusades, say, but if you look at the Arabs and what they did, it's like, yeah, I agree. The Abbasids and the Mamelukes and such, they were okay. The problems were the Seljuk Turks, and the Seljuk Turks. The reason why the Crusades happened is when they swept through the steppes into Persia and then swept across the Abbasid Caliphate and the remnants of the Abbasid Caliphate and into the Middle East. It wasn't just Christian, I guess say Christian sites. It was also certain Islamic sites. And they were like a barbarian horde, I guess.
They were a horde. They were a Muslim horde, essentially.
Yeah,
that's how they operated at that time.
Yeah, and they were heavily hostile because they were recently converted. Some of them were slave warriors as well. So the culture for them, they were very different from the Arab Muslims, because I guess you can see the Arab Muslims were more civilized in that sense.
Oh, by far, the Abbasids were fairly civilized. They were quite well integrated into the trade network and everything like that. There was an unspoken an understanding with the Byzantines of who owned what and where everything stood. The only problems came with Jerusalem, obviously.
I mean, in the previous, was it 2-3 centuries before the Crusades, the flashpoint was over trying to go westwards, so trying to get into the Byzantine Empire and up through Greece, but also where Islam, the Muslims had a big surge, was in Spain. And so the Crusades have a lot of that kind of fueled by, this what happened in Spain. Remember Granada, remember these things, and that kind of fight back against the Muslim incursions into Spain, and that clouds the decision of the Pope and Christendom to go into Jerusalem, go into the Palestine area, and fight Islam. There, it's almost like a second front.
Yes.
I see. Oh, one. What you sent? Was it 400?
400. What? Oh, sorry. I'm doing. I don't know why I sent that in private chat. Don't matter. Ignore that. I'm doing. I know why it's happened because I'm doing some 3D modeling at the same time. I must have typed in my my thing into chat. I must have typed in a measurement into chat by accident.
Okay. One thing I just brought up, which is another thing, which we'll cover the Crusades bit now. Maybe go on to Cleopatra a bit disjointed, but we'll go on to it. So yeah, as you said, Rhubba, you can see here the West, because obviously during the Rashidun Caliphate, the first Caliphate, they broke out of the Arabian Peninsula and they took on the Sassanids in Mesopotamia and Persia, and of course then it was Egypt and the Levant against the Byzantines. And then as time progressed with the Umayyads and such, they would spread eastwards along the Maghreb, which is like northern Africa, and eventually landing up in Spain. And the remnants of the Umayyads took over Spain from the Visigoths. Right at the same time, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads, and they were the last great Islamic caliphate before it fractured into various.
Well, if you don't discuss the Ottoman Empire as a caliphate.
Okay, last Arab caliphate, then I would say. Okay,
Yeah.
last Arab caliphate, and but what's quite important is this is where you have to look, because at this time the 1090 odd, we'll say about 1090 odd. Or you got it here, the expansion by 750, so about 1090 odd. This would have been the vast extent of the Islamic world and Islamic powers, and of course Persia and the Middle East was all the Seljuk territories. And you have to remember, and this is something that a lot of people tend to forget, is you think about before the Islamic caliphates, what were the key areas, the key sites and religious cities and areas of Christianity? Because apart from Rome and Constantinople, you had Antioch, you had like the Sea of Antioch, you had Jerusalem, Tyre, Alexandria, Cyrenia. I mean, if you just and then you got Carthage as well. I think Carthage had its
Ephesus as well. I think
Ephesus, exactly. And so what you had is, if you're from a perspective of a pious Frank or a pious Norman, you'll be thinking to yourself, most of Christendom, because for them, they genuinely, I mean, you see it in their writing, they clearly state that most of Christendom had fallen, which from their perspective would be inaccurate, because for them, they would have seen North Africa and Egypt as part of Christendom. They would have seen Syria and Armenia and Mesopotamia as Christendom. So again, from their perspective, it was like they weren't the invading force. It was more of a defensive action. And of course, the First Crusades was triggered because you had the Seljuk Turks who they started destroying, as we said, and killing Christians and preventing pilgrims.
The thing about as well, I'll give something to early Islam in itself. It was, to be fair, it was a little bit more open with some of the aspects, especially in art wise and architecture wise. It was a lot more free in that respect. They also did allow other faiths to operate to some extent, as long as they pay their taxes and their special taxes.
Yes.
They did allow pilgrims as well. Islam is a very weirdly functioning religion because it almost functions as half an offshoot of Christianity.
Yeah, because that's the thing. The Arab, the successors of Muhammad and his followers, they did allow pilgrims. They did allow, and this is the thing which again you're not talked about as well, which justifies crusades, which Dan Snow and Dan Jones do never talk about, and I think it's really disgraceful because they know better, and it explains a lot of the issues they
The
have.
Seljuks did not allow pilgrims.
They didn't allow pilgrims, but the majority of the population in Mesopotamia and Syria and Egypt at this time were Christian.
Yes.
I actually think it wasn't until the 16th century that
Unless you play
Egypt,
Crusader Kings, where it's not.
Well, Crusader kings, you can create satanic kingdoms or something. With some.
But I wouldn't say okay. I won't go as far as saying majority. Actually, I'd go as far as saying there's a hefty amount.
I saw a study which said that it was by the 16th century that Egypt became majority, like above 50% Muslim.
16th century, you're saying?
16th century, yeah.
That's really late.
That is really late. I don't know. I mean, I think from what I know that the most of Islam's conversions were amongst the Zoroastrian Persians, and the Zoroastrians
Zoroastrian, what a base religion.
Yeah. Well, they were obviously the religion that existed in Persia.
So much cooler, dude. Marduk was one hell of a. What a story that is. The story. Yeah. A guy. He's literally a dragon tamer. That is his whole story. Is that he tames the dragon and then he rides the dragon to the sun, and or something like that, and the fire god.
Doesn't he cut it up and make heaven and earth out of the entrails of his mum or something like that?
Yeah, it's so good. Plus, the thing about Zoroastrian is it was the first monotheistic faith, and it was so old. It's so old as it goes back to before the Persian Empire. And to have it destroyed was such a. It's still around to some extent today.
Yeah.
But sadly, all the
Have you read or listened to Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning?
I have it. The audiobook. Yeah. I haven't read
the audiobook.
So.
Well, the thing is that he says that the Marduk story, elements of it resonate throughout most of the great religions. Along comes someone to tame, to tame chaos and instill order.
See, a lot of Christianity comes from Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrian thought.
Yes, it's the case that Peterson makes the point that where Christianity differs is that God never had to struggle against. He doesn't have a coming of age story like all the other religions do, like Seth and I can't remember the names of the Egyptian gods, but
what Christianity did quite differently to a lot of the other religions around, like Mazdaki and
I mean, Christ is kind of the coming of age story, but that's
but
not.
He's not. But he's not.
It's not.
Because in Christianity, what they do, they make everything far more spiritual. So within Zoroastrianism, you have a lot more of a kind of demigods, and you have kind of what you'd see with Gilgamesh, a lot more kind of that sort of half man, half god. Well, if you're Gilgamesh, you're 2/3 god and 1/3 man. So, but because he's that godly, with Christianity, you have Christ then, who is more God than man, isn't he?
Well, he's considered half and half, but what he shares with the other creation stories is that he has to descend into hell before he triumphs, and Marduk has to do the same. And it's the sun. I just wish I could remember the Egyptian gods' names, but Ra. So the father is done in by the evil brother, and then the son has to go down to hell, find his dad, come back up, beat the uncle, and then they can but then the son then becomes the head, and the dad becomes a kind of wise counsel. But you see these elements repeated in lot. That's the point of Maps of Meaning, is that it's these stories are there, but they tell a what they are like received wisdom, that they are like stories that we're supposed to learn from.
Yeah. I don't mean to sound cringe when I bring this as an example, because it's going to be cringe, but I've been watching Cobra Kai.
I love Cobra Kai. I've been binge watching it lately as well. Yeah,
and I've been binge watching the 3 seasons of late, and it's interesting because and I've also been binge watching The Mandalorian, and those sort that sort of, and also I'm binge watching Avatar, the Legend of Aang as well. And one thing those three things have in common is what you guys said. It's you have your character, and in all 3 instances, the character needs to go somewhere. So there's a lot of traveling. And as they're traveling, I guess you could say it's like a pilgrimage sort of thing as well, because
it's the hero's journey. It's the baseline kind of metaphysical narrative that exists across a lot of human history.
Yeah, it's the hero's journey, and also it's the
I rescue your father from the underworld and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, because there's points in all those 3 where there's a great tragedy, and then the hero. I guess either there is an element of sacrifice, or there's an element where the hero has to, I guess you could say, step up to the plate, in whatever way that can mean. So, when it comes to Cobra Kai, one thing that you have as a massive theme is you have redemption arcs. And so, like in the first season, you have
it's Johnny's redemption arc.
Johnny's redemption arc, because and this is where you have a really you there. I don't know, in case people who haven't watched it and don't want to be.
I haven't watched it, so.
It's so good.
Do you want to watch it, Owen? Because I won't.
I've never even seen Karate Kid, so I don't.
Oh, goodness me! Well, there you go.
So basically, Owen, there's a scene in Karate Kid where Johnny beats up Daniel in like after a Halloween sort of high school Halloween party. And what Daniel does, he basically chucks water over him, and then Johnny and his friends, who are like dressed up as skeletons, chase after him. They beat him up, and it's like the 3rd beating I think they gave him. But while they're beating up Mr. Miyagi, who's like
I know who Mr. Miyagi
is. The Merlin figure. Jumps over this this fence and sort of jumps on top of Johnny, and then he beats up the Johnny and his friends and rescues Daniel, and then teaches him karate and karate. Then karate. Daniel-san. And and then you have this tournament at the end, and then he faces his fears, he faces the big bully and everything. And then the way Cobra Kai is a bit different is from Johnny's perspective, and the interesting story about it is it depends who's the real bully, because in the whole it actually looks like Daniel who was the guy in the wrong all along, but that's up for that.
I feel it flips the kind of narrative.
It doesn't, because even in Cobra Kai, Daniel is not an out-and-out villain. You understand why he reacts the way he does. And there's a bit of spoil towards the end of season 2. Both Johnny and Danny realize that there is a bigger menace, and that their personal rivalry is smaller in comparison to what is actually going to happen. I mean, I love Cobra. The Karate Kid encapsulates kind of Reagan's 80s in America. It kind of has this. It's kind of quite Reagan-esque, and it's a classic kind of you know, Miss kid who feels out of place, fish out of water kid's got to learn self-respect, got to learn to stick up for himself in the face of bullies. And it chimes in with kind of that Reagan era self-reliance and finding strength within yourself. Cobra Kai, it's almost like a perfect TV sequel. You know, it just meshes seamlessly with Karate Kid. I mean, you could skip Karate Kid 2 and 3, just have Karate Kid, then Cobra Kai. But what I think is that Cobra Kai is wonderful. It's kind of got this nice right of center message. You know, it mocks the millennials and the Zoomers and political correctness. Just absolutely rips it to shreds. You know, Johnny is just like it's like he's been in a time capsule in the 80s and he's come through to 2020 and just seen, you know, we must use more inclusive language, and Johnny is like, yeah, screw that. But it's almost like, and I hate doing this, I'm going to sound like a massive hypocrite, but it really is, for me, Cobra Kai is like the Gen Xers have failed and the Zoomers are like this uncontrolled monster that the Gen Xers can't understand.
Yeah,
because Johnny and Danny are the Gen Xers, and they're surprised at their kids and the social environment that they now inhabit. And it's like it's all got out of control and got away from them.
It's the world the Gen X has created, is what the Zoomers.
No, it's the world the Gen X has ignored.
Yes, if you're using yeah.
If we go with that, and I don't mind using the kind of boomer Gen X and millennial thing if it's like weaved as a fiction. I find it doesn't work as a real life model, but in terms of
it's funny how the Gen Xers are a full generation of fish out of water.
Yeah. So in Cobra Kai, the Gen Xers, represented by Johnny and Danny, are just, you know, they took their eye off the ball. You know, they just said the 80s was it. I was the king. All our games and all our music and all our stuff was great. And then they just went to sleep in the early 2000s. And they've just, my God, what monsters have we let fester in our absence?
Yeah. And I think one thing that I also find quite interesting is that, and this is something that's raised it's raised throughout the show, is where Daniel says, you do, it says to other people, you do realize I'm the same age as Mr. Miyagi was when he first met me. And he acknowledges that he doesn't have that, him in that generation doesn't have that same wisdom. The generation, I guess you could say, that served during the Second World War, and of course we know that Mr. Miyagi, he served, and I guess it's inside that there, for that sort of generation, or the greatest generation, as they would be called, there was some sort of life lesson, which I guess sort of wisdom. Because I mean, I know personally that the wisest person I knew was my grandfather, and he served during the Second World War. And so I think there is like that generational. There's that, because obviously part of the thing with Daniel is that he just, as you said, it gets out of control, and he doesn't know how to fix it, and like throughout the whole of season, or towards the end of season 2 and also into season 3, which is I won't talk about season 3 because it is fairly recent and I don't want to spoil it to anybody, but he basically, the premise is that he's just searching for answers of what to do because he doesn't know, and obviously Mr. Miyagi's not around, and so he has to and it's quite good because he ends up finding the answer, but it's sort of like a from beyond the grave sort of thing from Mr. Miyagi, which is I think it was quite nice. But
well, the thing about Daniel is that his lowest point in his life was that time when he moved from New Jersey to California, and he was starting to be beaten up by Johnny and his gang and the Cobra Kai dojo. And once he had Mr. Miyagi as his kind of tutor and mentor, and he learnt karate and he won the tournament, his life's only ever known ups. And when you get to Cobra Kai, it's just like he's a successful businessman. He's got a hot wife. He's got 2 children who are, well, Yeah, come with their own baggage. But he's only known success, and Johnny is the opposite. Well, the fascinating thing about Johnny is that in the Karate Kid films, he's a massive jerk, massive arsehole, you know, entitled. But then we find out in Cobra Kai that a lot of that's a front, because his life has just been has never known stability, never known kind of he's never had that kind of affirmation in his life, Johnny. And so he's still, but inside Johnny is actually a decent person struggling to get out, but he never had a Mr. Miyagi. He had Creech, who was like this badass, you know, sociopath, sociopathic Vietnam veteran. And that's interesting, isn't it? Mr. Miyagi is like, he is the he was Greatest Generation. He was a World War II veteran, and he was Japanese Nisei. So even though his original nationality was Okinawan Japanese, he was a naturalized American citizen and fought for the United States in World War II. And even though he had tragedy, he never blamed his adopted country. He never sort of was bitter about, you know, how the United States treated Japanese Americans. He moved on with life. Whereas Creech is the Vietnam veteran. You know, he was highly trained to fight a war that America gave up on. So he carries that bitterness, you know, so he overcompensated. The defeat is not known in this dojo. Fear is not known, because he cannot be, you know, that association with a war that America lost just hangs over Creech.
I mean, also, like, we've seen through, because there's several flashbacks with Creech. Is it Crease or Creech?
I think it's Creech. Or is it Crease? Crease.
I think it might be Creech.
Yeah.
There's several flashbacks with the Vietnam stuff, and that, as you said, you know, the fact that Mr. Miyagi, he lost his wife while serving, and not to get too spoilery, but you see something very similar, and but what you have is their experiences, because obviously the ones with Kreese, and I think this is mentioned, I think it's mentioned before in one of the films, but he is captured, him and what's his name, the other, Silver, is it Johnny Silver?
Terry Silver.
They're both captured in Vietnam. That's how they know each other, and they basically go through what, you know, like John McCain's and such went through, which is the POW camp and the torture and everything else. And I know that in the third film, Mr. Miyagi, when he hears about what Kreese went through, he says to Danielson, you know, war does things to people. You know, sometimes it's and so he, you know, so there's that understanding that Kreese isn't probably not the same person that he when he went into Vietnam, and the same person that came out. And we see that in Cobra Kai season 3, and we see the guy who trained Kreese as well, who is pretty intense person. I mean, it's just really interesting, because it's it just sort of shows how the concept of a character, you know, born evil is just not true. It's you know, and a lot of the time the people, I mean, this is the thing that we'll talk about in the
it's a redemption arc, isn't it? I guess it's based on redemption.
Oh, there's multiple redemption arcs in the whole Karate Kid Cobra Kai series.
Yeah, there's multiple ones, and this is the thing with the revisionist history, is to tie it all back in. When people did things in, you know, throughout history, and this is something that I can't really think, because I mean, I thinking critically here, I just don't understand how people can come to this conclusion unless you're a mad zealot, which I have to assume a lot of these people are. People who did things in history, you know, whether it's, you know, crusade or, you know, what have you, they didn't think themselves the bad guys. Nobody thinks yourself is the bad guy when you're doing something like this, because they're not. They're for them, this was their heroic. This was them saving the world. And bringing glory to God. This was them. This was
unlike these high and mighty people who are probably atheists. Let's be honest. To them, God was very real.
Yeah, and that's something that Dan Snow and Dan Jones refused to accept, because they said in the podcast, they said, okay, reasons for the crusade. Well, they did land, money, looting, and money, and I said, well, first of all, let's just look at it for a start. Look, and this is a one big myth with crusades. Apart from several certain instances, like with Richard the Lionheart and Emperor Barbarossa, 9 times out of 10, the Crusades were not carried out by the ruling monarchs, like i.e., kings, queens, emperors, that sort of stuff. It was usually vassals.
Yeah, it was vassals, or you would have a holy order come into your territory and conscript you.
Yeah, and the important thing is, with like the First Crusade, which is the best example, you take Beaumont, who was the Sicilian wing, and then you had who's the one from Champagne? I keep on forgetting his name now.
Is it Baldwin or Guy?
Maybe
there's so many Baldwins at that.
There's so many Baldwins. Yeah, and like the Champagne one is quite interesting one, because like the Frankish delegation, because they still refer to themselves as the Franks even at that point, they were not wealthy vassals. They were not wealthy in any sort of, like, I mean, if you compare them to, say, like the Duchy of Aquitaine at that time period or anything, they were not like a wealthy vassal. Because most of the wealthy ones didn't really go on this. It was only a few like warlords. It's basically like a Norman. It was like a sort of Norman side quest, I guess you could say, into the Holy Lands, because the main fighting force that did the heavy lifting were the Normans, the Huttville dynasty. But they had to, if you look at this from from a sort of real point of view, which I think a lot of people don't look at, especially like Dan Jones and Dan Snow, the amount of money they had to, I guess you could say, acquire to go on this crusade was immense, because they had to obviously raise the troops, they had to pay for weapons, horses, food, and then you look at the fact that they are in most of these cases were vassals of other lords. This was stuff they had to raise by themselves. They couldn't go asking for on behalf of their lords. Yes, you did have the Pope at the time, who was touring France, and who made the speech at Clermont. I guess you could say declaring sort of open season on the Seljuk Turks. But even at that time, the King of France was going to be excommunicated. So the French kingdom itself, the lands ruled by the French king, the Carpes, was hostile. So they wouldn't have helped the various French lords who were going over there to fight. So there was immense money, and so what happened was you had borrowing, and you had borrowing with the Crusades on the grand scale, especially in the First Crusades. And so you had all these young men who were going off in quite a bit of debt, no certainty, because there was no certainty that they were going to win this. In fact, it looked like very early on that this was going to be a bit of failed operation, because when they had they were marching through Hungary, the Crusaders ended up just sacking town after town as they were going through the Balkans and into the Byzantine territory and the Eastern Roman territory. And so when you look at it on the whole, you have to ask yourself, why did they really go? And as Owain said, they went because they were devout. They were religiously devout. They went there for religious reasons. It wasn't so much money and land and property, because there's no guarantee to any of that. If they were going just for that, I don't think any of them would have gone.
Well, no, like they understood the threat. These guys had just taken up Byzantium, for God's sake.
Exactly. And
and you've got to realize as well, Byzantium to them was the Romans, not the Byzantines. That was a term later coined. To these guys, they considered Byzantines the Roman Empire, still the Roman Empire, and so these guys had just literally kicked out the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal, and to go there and to have the balls to go there and just say, look, we're going to come and try and fight you with
And
just
who
like
was
far
their-
away from our own land is it's a madman's game.
It is. And
when-
who was their advisor? Their advisor was Peter the Hermit. He was the guy that was the glue to the. I guess you could say to the because there was friction. This is people don't talk. There was friction within the Crusader camp between the Hutvilles and the Bohemons and the Frankish lords as well. There was quite a lot of friction, and you had like this monk who was basically the guy who kept them all together, and tried to keep them on the path together, and keep their minds focused on what the objective was.
Yeah.
See, this is what annoys me about I'm trying to think when the first time I heard about the revisionist history of the Crusades, that it's probably in the aftermath of 9/11. This is revenge for what we did in the Crusades and things like that. The thing is that with these revisionists, historians, and they're always on the left, is that they focus on all these Crusaders came from the West, came from what would be the Italian states or the Frankish Burgundian area. They went east. They never talk about, well, what was it that drove the Muslims westwards? Why did the if the Crusaders are such the violent, conquering, power hungry
No one talks about the Mongols. They never talk about the Mongols.
They never talk about the Mongols, and they never talk about why is it that the Muslims decide to start off in the Middle East.
How Attila is mysteriously not talked about that much, even though he's the most deadly warlord in history.
Explain the conquest of North Africa and Spain. Go on, explain that. Why is that okay, but it's not okay?
Explain the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, it's
setting humanity back probably 2 centuries at least.
Well, the Britisher believes that the Library of Alexandria is all hype.
Really?
He thinks it's mostly hype. Yeah, we talked about this on an episode of This Week in History,
which could possibly hold the full works of Aristotle. It's just.
I mean, the Britisher may have a point, and this is where I would say may. Because from my understanding with the history of the Library of Alexandria, the library itself was destroyed during Julius Caesar's siege in Alexandria against the Ptolemies, Cleopatra's brother, when he was king. So from my understanding, the library was first destroyed then. The library itself was then rebuilt, but it was rebuilt not on the original site, but sort of outside of this, or on the edge of the city, and it was part of the they call it the Serapeum, which was like a complex, which was a mixture of the library, but also a temple to Serapis, one of the Egyptian gods, which was included in the Roman pantheon.
As the Roman pantheon, as happened with what the Romans tended to do to everything.
Yeah, they just put on the Roman pantheon and wait for it later. And then that pantheon, that Serapeum remained so until the time of Theodosian in the late 4th century, where that's when you had like the
Romans were the original collectors of Pokemon. Got to catch them all, and they just turn up. Oh, you have this god, cool.
Yep.
I choose I don't know, Minerva. I choose you.
You choose you, yeah. And of course, by the Theodosian period in the 4th century, by this time the Romans were Christian, and Egypt was a very Christian Roman province.
It was extremely Christian to the point where they used to have Coptic rebellions all the time.
Yeah, but this is the funny thing is during this time, their governor, who was he was a pagan. It was really bizarre. I don't know.
There was an Egyptian revival as well, like old school Egyptian revival.
Yeah. Well, that was Serapis, you see, because he was a god, Egyptian god. So that's why Isis and Serapis and Horus. Those were the 3 revival gods, and they were very popular amongst pagans. But in the city of Alexandria itself, I mean, it was by that time it was like majority majority Christian.
Well, these were Greeks. These weren't Egyptians as we know it today, because they themselves, the Egyptian who are in the people who are in Egypt today, are themselves transplants. They come from they are steppe people who migrated there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had Semitic
And Arabs.
You,
And Arabs.
you had,
Yeah,
you
they're a
had-
mixture of sort of Greek and Arab, really.
yeah,
aren't
you
they?
had like,
Coptics.
well, you had the Egyptian Semitic, so those like people of the natives of old Egypt. And then of course you had the Greeks. And then of course the Serapeum was attacked, because this is where it gets a bit funny, a bit confusing, because and this is where the atheists like to go, here we go, Christians destroying stuff. It's like, okay, let's look at this from a whole. What we know is that there was conflict between the two camps. The story is that there was supposedly a Christian mob which was mocking, which would started destroying stuff in Alexandria, and then the pagans came out, and then there was like street fighting, and then the pagans were all trapped because obviously they had smaller numbers in the Serapeum, and then the emperor, upon hearing what had happened in Alexandria, basically sent orders that the pagans had to leave the Serapeum and the library and the temple, and it was then converted into a church, because Theodosius was he was a Christian emperor who was very, very anti-pagan. I mean, he was probably the most anti-pagan of all of them, because he was the one that brought down the Serapeum. He brought down the Oracle of Delphine. He chucked the Altar of Victory out of the Senate, and he was also responsible for the conversion of the Vestals. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's
weird, that, because when you consider that so much of Greek paganism and Egyptian paganism got left by the wayside when it comes to Christianity, whilst in like kind of British, like Druidism really integrated heavily within British Christianity.
One thing that you find with early Christianity is it was a very popular religion within Greek culture. There were several aspects, because I mean, when you talk Greek, Greece, Greek, it was at that point. I guess you could say it was
Greek was hegemonic culture. Culture.
It's like saying European today. I mean, it's you can say that. Well, that's the
if you were Mediterranean, you were Greek.
Yeah, you agree. It's like the European today.
Because Greece had colonized, Greece over that 2,000-year period, basically colonized the entire Mediterranean.
Yeah, that's right, and it comprised of as far as Afghanistan, if you would.
It's almost certain that all three of us here probably have some Greek DNA.
Yeah, probably.
The thing is, even back then, if you weren't Greek, you wanted to aspire to be Greek. You wanted to, so this was the thing about the Romans, is that they looked to Greece and they said, well, what can we take, adapt, and adopt for ourselves? They always looked, the people in the ancient world, after Greeks' triumph over the Persians, everybody looked to Greece as the kind of the model that you wanted to aspire to be.
Well, Greece was also the technological powerhouse. But it was the driving force of the economy. It was where you could grow olive oil there, and olive oil was of course the big thing the big cash crop back then.
And it's interesting because I was watching a documentary about Paul and Peter, because one thing, you look at their missions, their missions. You go from Antioch, and then it goes through Anatolia, and you got Ephesus, Lydia, and at that time period in Athens and such, the most heavily populated part of the empire was Anatolia, and it was Greece, and all the ancient cities, which were major trading hubs, major cities, was all in those regions, and and what was quite interesting was you think about the early Christians. Why was it that it resonated so much with Greece? And you realise that Paul and Peter, while being Jewish, they were culturally Greek. Especially Paul, because he was born outside of Judea. He was born in Tarsus, which is in Anatolia. So he was his father served as a tent maker for the Roman legion, and so for Paul, he was able to have citizenship through that. So he was a Roman citizen, but he was also culturally Greek. And then when he was able to go and preach in these various cities, he was able to communicate Christianity to a Greek perspective. And I think in many ways Christianity was more of a it was, especially early Christianity, was more of a Greek concept.
Well, if you think about it, you can tell that just by comparing Christian moral thought with Aristotle. You can see how much Aristotelian thought has been put in, like metaphysics has been put into Christianity. It's really easy to draw the line from Aristotle to Christian morality.
A lot of that was from Luke, which was one of Paul's, St. Luke. I can't remember because I know there's before someone says I know there's multiple Lukes. It was Luke the healer, the medicine one.
The Dr. Luke, yes.
Dr. Luke. Yeah, because this is the interesting thing is one of the things that Paul, where I guess you could say James the Just, which was Jesus' half brother, where they disagreed, was the role of Gentiles.
Jesus had a half brother.
He did. St. James the Less, or St. James the Just. The Just, yeah.
I think it was the Just. Yeah, James the Just. And
how is this not a bigger deal?
He first gets mentioned in Acts, but it makes perfect sense that, after begetting the Son of God, Joseph would have turned around to Mary and said, well, how about one that's just ours?
Basically.
I mean, they're not going to hang around. They're not going to go, Jesus, we're never going to replicate that again. So they would have had they just would have gone about, because there is a big lag, isn't there? There's like Jesus is born, and that's a big deal. And then a few years go past, then he makes an appearance at the temple, and as a child speaks with wisdom. Then we kind of lose track of him throughout his teens and
his adolescence.
20s. Yeah, his adolescence. So in the meantime, Joseph and Mary are still a traditional Jewish couple. They are expected to have more children.
See, one thing I love about the theory, this is my own theory where Jesus is, this is my own heretical theory with Jesus. He, during those missing years, as a teenager, he served as a craftsman on a boat, and he travelled to the West Country and went to Glastonbury and learned
that comes from the fact that is it a blood Joseph of Arimathea? I'm not sure if he's either a blood relation or he's a close friend of the family.
I think. Oh God! Now you ask me. I don't know if he is a blood relation. He could be related to. Who could he be related to? Maybe.
He might be part of the same tribe.
Yeah,
could be part of the same Jewish tribe.
Yeah, because they were the tribe of Benjamin.
Oh yes, because you've got to go back, haven't you? You've got to go, because the genealogy is traced through Joseph. Joseph is tribe of Benjamin, I think.
Yes, I thought it was become your mother's tribe.
Possibly. Yes, Luke gets it wrong. He gets the genealogy wrong in at the start of his epistle.
Because you have to be born to be born Jewish. You have to be born of a Jewish mother.
Yeah.
Yes,
but going back to Joseph of Arimathea, it's known that he had the shipping that could have gone up to as far as Cornwall.
Yeah,
because we know Phoenicians.
But the Cornish, always the Cornish.
Yes, the Phoenician. Well, probably if you're coming up from the Mediterranean in a trireme,
It's the nicest place as well.
Cornwall's going to be the first place you hit, isn't it? You're going to hit the lizard first.
Yeah, interesting thing about you talk about trade and stuff in Cornwall. Like, there is a possibility that the Greeks did settle Cornwall. There's an outside possibility, very outside.
Yes, I mean, Herodotus mentions, I think, wild, rain-swept lands far to the west that basically is so uncivilized you don't want to go there. And people have said, "Oh, that sounds a bit like southwest England."
But interesting thing. What we're learning now is that it is obviously is that it turns out the people of Britain, the Britons who the Romans met, weren't in fact Celts at all. They weren't they didn't share any. They were genetically very different to the Celts of the continent, to the Gauls and such. They in fact adopted the Celtic culture through trade, because so it's possible. So it means that would mean as well that the Celtic languages of the continent would be extremely different to what we have in Britain here, because our languages themselves aren't actually Celtic. So well, Gaelic itself is beyond anything what we can think where it derives from.
I used to know this Cornish guy. His surname was Vingo. It's a name that ends with an O and an E, and he said it's a very old Cornish name. And he was explaining that sometimes you get these Cornish names that end in vowels or kind of vowels that you won't get with either Celtic names or with Anglo-Saxon or Norman names. And he said
they're likely Roman.
Yeah, it could either be Roman or he said Phoenician, because they had. It does go back a long way, and it's conceivable. The whole thing about did these feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green is because that if Joseph of Arimathea had the trading connections to the southwest of England, then it's barely plausible, but it's conceivable. Yes.
Yeah, it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
But there's also the idea as well. Because in South Wales, the Romans turned up in South Wales, and they were very perplexed that for some reason these people, these tribe of people called the Silures, were fairly tanned, like a Mediterranean in a Mediterranean way, all with black hair, which is also Mediterranean, more of a Southern European genetic trait. And they were really confused by this, and they thought that that possibly a Greek tribe have gotten lost up here.
Yes, I mean, let's look at it from this point of view. Okay, who is the most Greek-looking Welshman alive?
Tom Jones is very.
Tom Jones.
He's very. I think that's more to do with he may have ancestry to do with Tiger Bay and all that.
Yeah,
but there's many Welsh in the valleys who are born very tanned. There's not pale skin Welsh. For the Welsh, there are obviously the pale skinned gingers, but a lot of them are of more Irish descent. But the Welsh themselves were all short, quite tan. Can be quite tanned, quite darker skinned than normal other Celts. Very obviously, as I said, short, darker head. You find most Welsh girls are brunettes. A lot of very Welsh.
Most of the Welsh girls I know are brunettes. One or two blondes. Like I don't know. What's her name? Joanna Page. But I know I've met a few Welsh girls who are like Joanna Page. Yeah, but most of the ones I've met have been dark haired, either very dark brown or black, and eye color usually goes around green or hazel.
Yeah, green. I have a mix of blue and brown, which makes my eyes green. Very weird, and hazily green. A lot of Welsh people can have green eyes naturally. Blue is obviously very popular here as well, but the Welsh differ quite heavily genetically as well in North and South Wales. There's apparently it's one of the greatest jumps in genetic differences it's such a short geographical area, because what happened, like, so we're completely, the stream's completely off what it was meant to be about.
No, but it's about, but this is good. This is kind of like we're considering all aspects of history as compared with the revisionists.
But so I'll just finish off my train of thought then, and we can get back to it. So where it is, so in North and South Wales are more genetically different than the English and the Scots are. This is primarily due to when the English turned up and the Scottish decided to invade the Welsh lands in the north, and the Irish decided to genocide the west of Wales, because the Irish did that, and no one likes to talk about how the Irish genocided the Welsh, but there we are. The genetic differences came about. So in West Wales, there's a lot of Irish DNA like running about. In South Wales and Southeast Wales, especially in the South Wales valleys, there's a lot of very pure DNA in there. Southeast is obviously very English. In the northwest, that's extremely deeply Britain. Like that is that, because the DNA from the northwest comes from the kingdom of Strathclyde, which was a Welsh kingdom in northern England, in Cumbria and in Lothian. And this is where the names, the kingdom of Strathclyde is they were Welsh speaking. They spoke a dialect of Welsh. They are responsible for the names for Glasgow and Edinburgh, for example. So Edinburgh itself comes from a Welsh name, Caridin, and Glasgow, I think, comes from something to do with blue something. Yeah, so it's very interesting when you learn about that stuff, and so they all got corralled into Wales eventually, and then you ended up with this weird, because mid Wales is this almost untraversable part like area, barbarous with, and so they kept, even though they had the same culture, the reason the cultures are the same is because they were the same prior, they were similar prior to the let's say the English encroachment. And so that they were left in this kind of area, and so for a long time the Southern Welsh and Northern Welsh never really considered them. They considered themselves of the same culture, but they never considered themselves so much brothers in arms as they have even different foundation myths. Like the Southern Welsh were far more romanticized, whilst the Northern Welsh were remained far more Celtic. Yeah, even though they were also Roman.
I remember, I think probably one of our first conversations we ever had, I had with you, was on the concept of the sort of Celtic unity in the British Isles, because I've seen a lot of Plaid Cymru activists and Sinn Féin types and even SNP types try and pull this one, and it's like, well, if you look at it on the whole, I mean,
there isn't much in the way, historically there's not much to justify Celtic unity.
No, there isn't. I mean, like I think St. Patrick is a really good source to explain like on Ireland. I mean,
St. Patrick is the closest thing that you'll ever get to unity with Ireland and Wales, because St. Patrick himself was Welsh.
Christianization was the only thing that I would say which the Christianization of Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Cornwall.
And you got the Glyndŵr Rebellion.
Yeah. But the Christianization itself was the only thing that I would say the Celts probably agreed on and adopted.
Because when the story, I would advise, I always say this, I advise everyone to read into the fall of the Romano Britons, because it's quite a tragic story. It's a very tragic story. How basically they were turned on by everyone. So they had a really bad king called Vortigern.
Oh, yeah. Well, he wasn't actually a king; he was a tyrant.
He was a tyrant, and he was desperate to keep his lands and stuff like that. And then the problem was the Irish were raiding the west coast, because the Irish are basically you talk about the Viking Age. There was a Welsh Viking Age way before what we call the Vikings now, where like the Saxons themselves began life as virtual Vikings, who were raiding coasts. You had the Belgae. You had the Jutes, who were Vikings before Vikings. They were literally more or less the same. You had then the Irish were also raiding, and the Picts were raiding as well before the Picts got wiped out by the Irish. So, but so basically, they on all fronts. The Romans had this very bad king who was like, okay, I want to deal with these Picts and Irish, and so what we'll do, we'll get the Saxons in, we'll get the Angles in, and we'll and then they came, they took everything, and they were asked for payment. He obviously had nothing to pay them because he was dirt poor. And so he thought, I'll give them some land as a boon, and then they'll stay here and help me protect it. Problem was, he gave them the best bit of land he could, which was Kent, which was the richest and most fertile area of land in the UK. and they were like, oh, this is really nice. I wonder if there's more land like this. And then then slowly but surely, word got back to, the northern Germany about, this is these weak, hapless Romans. Romano-Britons who don't know what they're doing, and they're desperate for anyone to help them. To the point, and so eventually the English all came, and this even drove then the people in my area in West Wales, the Dematai tribe, who still exist, who took on the name Dyfed by this point. They took on they actually invited the Irish in to protect them. So there was an Irish warlord called who took on a Roman name to protect, and he basically kind of pranced about like a Roman, pretending to be a Roman, called Votaporix. These were very desperate times, and so slowly but surely the Welsh got what we'd call Welsh today got pushed into the mountains by the Irish, the combined forces of the Picts, the Angles, and the Jutes and the Irish. But an interesting part then is the last hurrah of the Romano Britons, which I think is dead right, is probably who King Arthur is a guy called Cadwalder. King
But isn't he also known as Aurelius Ambrosius?
Well, he has a Latin name as well, because all Welsh kings did. Welsh court was taken in Latin. Even Llewellyn's court was taken in Latin. He considered himself a Roman after all. This is another thing about Welsh nationalists they won't tell you, is that a lot of history has kind of bled out the amount of how romanticized Wales is. I consider Welsh a distant romanticized culture. I think that's where a lot of the Welsh poetry, the bardic traditions and stuff come from, is from the romanticization of the Romano Britons. But so yeah, King obviously is where the dragon comes from as well as King Cadwal. Yeah, I get it right, Cadwalder. I think it's that's the king. It might be another name. It's something something. Cadwalder, and he allied himself, believe it or not, with the Angles to fight back a Pictish army.
Yeah,
and which is quite mad. And so what he kept Abrac, which you know as do you know what Abrac is, guys? You probably know if you know your Latin place names.
Abrac
No. In Welsh. It's Abrac in Welsh. It's Abracum.
Yorkshire. Oh, Ibericum. Yes,
Yorkshire, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what the Welsh is for Yorkshire. Is Abrac. And see, you can see how Latinized it was. Like for example, Devon is Deva. Deva, and it goes on. So it's like my town is in Welsh is Caermyrddin, which is a Welsh version of the Welsh had a thing of putting if there was a fort, it'd be a Caer, and what they'd do then, they'd put the Roman name after it initially. So it was for Caer, it'd be like for Bath, it'd be Caersulis. And then for where I'm from is Caermyrddinum, and then it actually became Caermyrddin over time.
Come on.
And same thing comes. I don't buy the whole idea of the original name for Cymru being. I know it's very romantic and very cool, but Cymru itself, I think, is a Welshization of the Latin word Cambria. It could be the other way around, but I think it's Cambria, which became Cambrian, which became Cymru. And eventually then, during a rebellion, they must have come up with a a separate origin for a foundation to rile up people. But anyway, I could do a whole stream about this sort of stuff. I'll probably offend many a Welsh historian, but there we are.
But then the person who I associate with the name Aurelius Ambrosius, who's probably the Roman name of the guy you're referring to, toppled Vortigern. Vortigern, I think, was forced into a marriage with a Saxon princess.
I think this is after Vortigern, so it might not be Ambrosius.
But I think Vortigern was Vortigern was forced into a marriage as part of the deal, that he had to take a Saxon wife, and they had a child called Cerdix, and Cerdix comes back later to try and claim to try and be the rightful king of.
Cadwallon ap Cadfan is what is his name. Is what I'm thinking of. Sorry, carry on.
I was thinking because of all these names, you have the Roman name, you have the Saxon name, you have the kind of the Celtic name. It all gets, and it's the same person.
Yeah, but, I mean, I've talked about this actually today with Radlib. With Radlib about because one of the things he wanted to know was obviously at this point before the Saxons turned up, the Romans, the Romano Brits were quite heavily Christianized, and he wanted to know why the Saxon kingdoms within a couple hundred years managed to well, at least some of them were heavily Saxonized pagan societies. And I actually have a theory which I've talked about when I was studying, and I'll run this by you. If you guys know, I guess you probably know the Justinian plague.
Yeah,
heard of it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I think which historians probably should look at, because it coincides when you had just before the I guess you could say the mass migration of the Saxons, the Jutes, and the Angles, you had the Justinian plague, which swept across Europe, and it swept across. We know it swept across like the Justinian's empire. And the Sassanids, it did sweep across Visigoths and Franks. Now, one of my theories is that it reached Britain and it killed a lot of the population, and that's why you had depopulation of cities like London and Colchester and such, and why you had such people going to the countryside. But you had also a situation where there was quite a lot of land which was basically empty and unused and unpopulated. And so when the Saxons and the Jutes and the Angles started turning up, it wasn't that they, because I think one theory is that they turned up and they just sort of Saxonized the Romano Brits. I don't think that really happened, because I think if that happened, you would have seen more
Welsh words within.
Yeah.
You only have Welsh place names, but not Welsh words within English.
Yeah, and also you'd probably see Christianity coming out a lot stronger within
early. Yeah, it doesn't really make. I don't buy the idea that they intermingle too heavily. I really don't.
Yeah, and I think there have been some historians who talked about it, but I don't know many people that tie in this is my theory. This is my theory that I've thought up for a while, and there's the Justinian plague, and I think it's definitely because it fits the timeline of events. And so that's why you had this, because basically it was the coastal regions of eastern England which became the original settling point for those Saxons. And I think there was a point where there was a good portion of eastern half of England, which was Saxonized, and then you would go into the basically warring with the various Celtic, the Romano Brits.
The Romano Brits were never really united. Never really did. They like Wales itself was only united underneath the English. A united Wales never existed fully. Llywelyn got close, so did Rhodri, but they never did it.
So that was my theory on it. To be honest, I might write up actually. Do like a.
I want to just clarify as well. some of the things I said. They weren't. Cadwallon did not fight Picts. He fought the king of Northumbria, who was of a different tribe to the southern kings, and he fought alongside the Mercians, Penda of Mercia.
Yes.
So so he did that, and Cadwal became so revered is that Caedwalla became a very popular name in Wessexan society for a long time afterwards.
Yes.
He was very revered. To my point, I do think that Caedwalla is Arthur. I'm convinced he is, because he's from Penarth. It's how you could which could obviously Pendragon.
Yes.
Like eventually somehow pen could be made into Pendragon somehow. If you think of how the French did things, it could have been Arthur Penarth.
Yeah.
And then it eventually became the French that eventually turned that into Pendragon somehow, in some form. In like maybe when it's translated into Latin or French, there was a similar sound to dragon, and it became, I don't know, Pendragon.
Yeah. But see, all of this comes from Bede. I mean, this is the thing. All this knowledge and information.
Not just Bede. A lot of it comes from as well Geoffrey of Monmouth.
Yeah, but like the first like one of the earliest like of the Saxon perspective comes from Bede.
Yeah.
Of Roman Britain, because he does like he covers like from Julius Caesar to his present day. And so obviously there is because
Bede was good at
the plague theory that people say, but how come it's not mentioned? And it's like, well, that's my thing. The plague happened, and then the Saxons turned up, and that's why they weren't aware of what had happened. For them, it was just, unused land. And
I could. See, the thing is, I could sit here all night theorizing about things that happened in medieval Britain, because I think so much of it, as we think of it, is wrong.
Yeah.
I think that I'm one of these guys who thinks that British society is far more advanced than we take credit. We give it credit for.
I think so. I think there is a lot of mystery. I mean, that's the one thing, because unfortunately, and this is where it's just bloody annoying. The Franks and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths were very respectful when they went into Roman territory, and the bloody Saxons and Jutes and everyone else, all our ancestors, were not that respectful, and they ended up just.
Well, the problem is, like, there's two big things that happen in history that makes that clouds British vision. One is the Norman invasion, because the Normans did a lot of propaganda work to demoralize to get rid of anything that happened before them as nonsense. But there's also one of the things that backs this theory is that you don't understand is how much education, like how many Brits were going to Byzantium at this time to be educated, and how devoutly Christian the Isles were.
I'm trying to remember the exact time in history, but I think it's either the late 13th or the early 14th century. It's around about the reign of Henry III. And I read a book a few years ago called Dr. Mirabilis, which is an account of the life of the monk and scientist Roger Bacon. And it's absolutely fascinating, because people think of monks and the church in that time as being very anti-science, anti-education. And these guys were the scientists of their age.
Yeah, they're alchemists, yeah.
Roger Bacon invented optics and lenses.
Well, they invented spectacles at this time.
Spectacles, yeah. He may have accidentally discovered gunpowder at one stage before it was officially.
If you look at the monks of Strata, Florida, they actually operated a pharmacy out of the monastery, and they were creating herbal remedies, and they had a very advanced medicine knowledge.
And here's the other. There was a great monk of that time who taught Roger Bacon, called Albertus Magnus, and he was a big advocate that monks should indulge in scientific learning based around Aristotelian principles, of observation.
But, like I keep saying, Aristotle is vital to Christian understanding.
And So people naturally ask, but surely as a pre-Christian, Aristotle would be considered a heretic, and the church would disregard everything he said. But the church at the time had this view, well, before Christ, there were wise men all around the world, and we should never discount the wisdom of a non-Christian. And perhaps they were working towards something to try and work their way towards an understanding of God in their work.
That may have been the case on the continent, though. But you got to remember, these were insular Christians. They weren't the Christianity, the Catholicism of the continent. They were so insular Christianity was so separated from Rome. They think that it was that this is. I think this is where which really is the basis of kind of the where we're not technically Europeans that the British are. Like that is because that is the separation of Christianity, the separations of the Christianities in that period after the fall of the Roman Empire. Because insular Christianity develops, which is a kind of becomes more paganized, but also it develops its own rule set, and it grants certain liberties that normal other Christian areas didn't.
Yeah.
So, and they celebrated different festivals. They celebrated the solstice still big style. They still had fertility rites in Cornwall. It's quite wild.
I mean, the same could be said for the Scandinavian when they were Christian. But I mean, personally, I don't think the Scandinavian. I mean, the Scandinavians were Christianized, but I don't think they were ever really understood Christianity in a way. And there's a reason. I think it was I think John Peterson explained it why the Scandinavians were so hard to Christianize, and it's because they were the pagan religion which actually had more than just oral tradition. And it was actually very well organized religion. In fact, it was like a religion that could compete with Christianity.
Yeah, Druidism was very organized.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Druidism was that when the Romans invaded Britain, it was again pre-Christian. It was actually the Romans were the ones that destroyed Druidism in mainland Britain. I know it continued obviously in Ireland and such for some time, and then that's when you had the syncretism with St. Patrick, because he was the one that blended Latin Christianity with Celtic paganism, and you had sort of the emergence of Celtic Christianity, but that caused some problems back home with the bishops in Britain, because there was I think he was accused of heresy or some forms of not following scripture correctly. But yeah, I say we'll move on now, because we'll get back to the revisionist bit.
Oh, that sounds fun.
So we're going to move on to Cleopatra. Now, this is quite an interesting one, because this is something which this is something that I see a lot of Americans. It's usually a lot of American women, and it's usually a lot of and I have to say this is probably the most sort of peak low info people have issues with this, and it's really narcissistic, this issue. We must be represented. We must have people on screen that looks like us. Because they lived in Africa, and it's like, okay, and this is quite interesting, because this is a tweet conversation where you have this one person here, I assume American, I think maybe yeah, I assume, but they cast Gal Gadot as Cleopatra. Fuck Hollywood, obviously very cross, and the UFO chap here says Cleopatra was Greek descent, even though she ruled Egypt, but Gal Gadot ain't Greek either, so fair. And then the chap or woman or whatever shares a link to the Independent, where it argues Cleopatra should be played by a black actor, but not just for historical reasons. And so, yeah, and I've been seeing a lot of this across Twitter with the whole Cleopatra Gal Gadot thing, where at the start you basically had the typical and I'm going to be careful when we use the words. I remember 10 years ago watching Louis Theroux, and I believe one of the episodes he went to
I think I know the one you mean.
Black Israelites in America.
Oh, that is such a strange moment in that, because it's almost laughable, but at the same time, it's quite chilling. Isn't he pointing to this picture, like ancient manuscripts, and he said, "Look, black Shakespeare, black, Cromwell, black."
James, yeah.
As Mayor of Cromwell, I am certainly not black.
Yes. You're not black. Well, we haven't seen a picture of you, so I cannot confirm nor deny.
And then Theroux in his usual style is just going, tell me more.
Yeah, and so these Black Israelites, and they're the most fascinating people in America. I mean, they have this idea that certain
they set the Covington boys up as well.
Yeah, they did. I mean, ever since then, they've actually their views have gone mainstream. So I don't think it's just a theory, but we'll get into that.
Well, like the idea, Beethoven was black, that got somehow quite a bit of attention.
All important and significant people in European history were black, and 10 years ago, I remember I watched it and I laughed at them. I just thought they're a bunch of lunatics in New York, and that they're harmless. I actually thought they were harmless lunatics. And of course, in America, you've got your freedom of speech and everything. So if you want to spout off that all these people are black or whatnot, I mean, they're allowed to do it. But within recent years, especially within the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, there has been their views have become they were mainstreamed, and then they became mainstream views. And that's where the sort of jokes of it, the jokes and giggles for me is sort of stopped, because now it's just all out lies. I mean, I could sit before you and say, now that every single Zulu warrior at Walkstriff was a white guy. Now we all know that's not true, because we know the genealogy of these people. We know because we see them, the art, depiction, photos, the list just goes on, logic as well. So we know, but that's the sort of same level of me saying no, these Zulus were white guys, and I've got proof here. And it's just batshit crazy, batshit crazy proposition. And one of the things which is this is sort of taken in, and the Gal Gadot story is taken in a lot of midwits who are not.
Let me just say straight up first. Right, let's get this right. Gal Gadot is a perfect cast for Cleopatra, because she's exactly what she would look. She's of a similar historically accurate race and origin as Cleopatra, being from the Levant.
Exactly.
Yes. But I think she's certainly a better fit than Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes. No. I think honestly, I think it's great casting. I think it's so because she's got Gadot being the Israeli, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. She has, probably being from that area of the world, quite a bit of Greek in her as well. If obviously being Jewish as well, and she does have a bit of a Greek appearance. She has a bit of a Greek appearance to her.
No doubt.
And she does look like someone who would have been. She does look like a Coptic Greek who would have been in that period. She would have looked very similar to it. Anyway, Anyway, that's it. I think it's good casting.
So I think it's absolutely fine, but here's the thing. I was looking at people getting outraged Gal Gadot's casting, but Elizabeth Taylor, the previous sort of big movie incarnation of Cleopatra, never mentioned. There's no thought of the 1963 movie getting banned or censored or being broadcast with a be careful, your sensibilities might be upset if you watch this film. And I think part of it is because Elizabeth Taylor's iconic, and you don't You don't touch the revered icons. You know, the left can't quite go there yet on Elizabeth Taylor. They can't cancel her yet. But also, what do we know the left for being, which they vehemently deny?
Racist.
Racist too, and particularly, well, not just racist, but they've got it in for a particular nation that exists in that Levant area. And I think part of this anti-Gal Gadot as Cleopatra thing is driven by the fact that she's Israeli.
You think?
Yeah, because the left
She's
wing.
because she's Israeli.
Yeah, because
Yeah, I just think.
Anti-Semite.
Yeah, it's the old anti-Semite, but it's not just. She could be an American Jewish actress or a European Jewish actress, and there would be still some grumblings. But the fact that she's a Jewish actress from Israel, she is an Israeli citizen.
Beautiful at that.
Well, that country's full of beautiful women, I tell you. That's but I think that's driving part of it. I mean, there is the historical revisionism thing, but I think the anger and the bile, I think, is particularly derived from the anti-Israeli section.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is that I also think, I mean, from what I can see, I think there's also another instance, and I think a lot of it comes from because a lot of it's American. A lot of it is young Americans living in the coastal cities,
as we know, yeah.
And then to top that off, I mean, I think it comes from a place of the old American ignorance, a very insular. Because I think America is still a very insular nation, and we always talk about the rednecks. It's not the rednecks who are the insular. I think it's the coastal states which are the insular people, because they have this. They sort of apply their own, I guess, their own world, what's around them, to every other nation, and they set the standards for every other nation. And now they've been setting the standards for that, from the historical perspective. And what you've got is, for them, they hear, okay, Cleopatra, Egyptian princess. Where is Egypt? Egypt's Africa. Okay, who's in Africa? Oh, everyone in Africa is black.
Well, yeah. As we know too well, the importation of American race politics has destroying the Western world, because it doesn't make sense on a global scale, because they're trying to impose that everyone thinks like everyone thinks like the way Americans have always thought. It's never been like that. Like, American racism is more or less a purely modern thing. Like, racism in Europe didn't really function like that. In a sense, they were like, for example, you had advisors in the Tudor period who were Malayan, and there was also in that period as well. They would have seen, if you were black and you were in Europe, they would have seen you as probably a very wealthy person, because you would have come from the Kingdom of Mali, which was at that time extremely wealthy. You know, it's like, you think of what's his name? Who's the richest guy of all time? The guy,
the Sultan of Brunei, is it? Or?
No, it's the King Emperor of Mali, the King of Mali.
The one that bankrupted Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah, I know who you mean. I cannot remember his name.
He's a leader in Civ. He's a leader in Civ 4. If you need.
Yeah. Again, I feel
bad for not knowing that.
But this is the thing. I had an interesting conversation with a black nationalist, like a paramilitary nationalist sort of young woman, and I'll bring up the thread actually, because I could do that. I'll come back to this article. It's very, very interesting, because obviously this was a lot of it was on slavery and the usual stuff, and it was after Jaws tweeted an image out of what was it, the Duke and Duchess of
being carried into
Harry. Yeah, that was it. Being carried.
Again, Polynesians ain't black. They're Polynesians.
Yeah,
I don't like the term. I don't like the term black either. It doesn't make sense because not all of Africa's black. Not all of Indians ain't black. They're Indian. They're subcontinentals. It's like Zulus are a different kind of black to They're very different to Abyssinians. They're almost an entire continent away. You wouldn't say the Chinese are the same as the Europeans, would you? Yeah. So that's the distance you're talking about from almost Ethiopia to the southern tip of South Africa.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense to do this nonsense thing, and it only works in the American context because given the terrible kind of nature of what America was like in the turn of the century, they were kind of forced into this idea of a second nation, and it's kind of literally destroyed it. It like completely ruined their way the way they think about race and the way the world thought about race.
Yeah,
because it was more important to be where more important. Your nation was far more important than your race. Always was.
Yeah, and I've seen this from I've used this example as before where an American had to learn the hard way. And it was it was at the last general election, and I'll talk about this, but I'll just give it very quick. Basically, she was running for the Liberal Democrat ticket in North Devon. She came from Minneapolis. She was a Democrat over there. She was, globalist family, usual stuff. She came from good stock, and she basically went out on radio at the Lib Dem conference, and she was asked about local radio there about North Devon, how she'd be finding it because she'd been parachuted in as a candidate, and she was set to win. I mean, the opinion polling on the time, because I saw from local West Country Conservative member at the time, I knew that it was looking very bleak for the Conservatives down there in North Devon because of the Lib Dem revival that was going on.
And Devon, Bristol area, ripe area for Bath especially, big Lib Dem stronghold, Bath.
Yeah, Bath, yeah. But North Devon, I thought was going to go Lib Dem. I was pretty certain of it. And what happened was she was basically doing an interview, and in the interview she basically said about North Devon. She said, "Oh well, the people in North Devon probably don't understand the how rich diversity can be, immigration and she talked about immigration. Then she talked about opening up the borders, and then she said, oh, but also one of the problems that they've got is that it's too white."
You don't say things like that in Britain.
No.
Was she the one who said back in where I'm from, Camden, it's really, and she kind of was saying, why can't Devon be like Camden?
Yeah, she said, why Devon can't be like fucking Chicago or something. And and as you can imagine, the BBC presenter, who was like the local regional radio presenter, he said to her, "What?" Because he was confused. And then he went back to the studio and he was talking to this with his co-host, and they were just completely baffled. You had a lot of angry phone-ins. The news started spreading. I remember watching it on Facebook, local. You have we have these local Facebook groups for various towns and villages, and people were angry as hell. There were just literally people, Lib Dem voters, Conservative voters, even Labour voters, local types, were just angry as hell because they just saw it as really offensive stuff. Now, the thing is, where there's culturally different in America, if she said that, probably wouldn't have batted an eyelid, most people. In Britain, that is basically, it'd be like us going over to America and saying, oh, well, there's too many Catholics living here in this one district in California. And because obviously religion's not a very important feature in the American life, it'd be like turning around and saying, oh, there's too many Catholics here. It would be
when you say that, if you go to Boston and say there's too many Catholics, there's going to be a big issue.
Yeah, it's going to be a big issue. You say, oh, well, why aren't there more Baptists or something, or more evangelical.
Well, if you go, say it's the simplest thing as saying you go to New York and you go to an Italian area of New York and say there's too many Italians here. Why can't it be Irish?
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. It would be such an offensive comment to make. And the problem is she didn't realise she did anything wrong. And then you had this point where the Lib Dems had to basically take her aside, listen, saying, you're going to have to apologise. And then she sort of apologised, and it was like a real half-hearted apology. And then moments later, the Lib Dems basically announced that they had dropped her as a candidate. And they had to then rush to get someone else. By then, the Conservative Party, as it always is, very good with
comes out in the end somehow.
Yeah, well, it's very good at swinging, like punching.
How it does it, I just don't know.
It's the amazing self-writing mechanism that is a top secret design that nobody can fathom how it's designed, how it works.
It's called fear of socialism.
The thing is,
well, I've got a theory about English conservatism, and that it is never. People say, "Oh, they conserve nothing." You don't understand. Conservatism in England means anti-radical. And
I think there's many, including me to some extent, who would argue that even many elements of the Conservative Party now are quite radical still in comparison to us because of the London bubble.
Yes, because they're being pulled in that direction. But they would consider themselves. They go, they would say, yes, like William Hague's recent article in The Spectator. And he was arguing that, it's okay to be a little bit progressive. That was basically the gist of his argument. Now, for William Hague, he would just go, oh, you may call me a closet leftist and all that, but you should see the guys to the left of me. I'm safe compared to them. That's why a lot of the Proseccos are like. He said, yes, I make a few nods in that direction.
I can't believe Hague said that. I thought Hague was genuinely quite fine.
He was kind of defending the legacy of him and Cameron in government with the gay marriage and ending clause 28. But I think Hague is very out of touch with just how bad things.
He's a politician, not of the culture war.
Yeah, he's stayed out of the culture war, and his optics are about 15 years out of date.
I think most politicians who had their heyday in the 90s, whether it's like Blair or Hague or any, I think most of them are in that sort of out of touch.
Please retire.
Portillo still gets it. He still understands.
But he's not even a member of the Conservative Party. He just left it because it's really funny because he's not a member of the party, and he had a chance because he was offered a safe seat and he just wouldn't come back. Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons why. I think there was a lot of internal things with the party because I know that he stood, and there was a lot of like nastiness. Did
he get powelled?
I think he might have done, but we'll find. I don't think he's ever admitted it, but I think he's
because I think we all three of us here would know. Whether you agree with him or not at a level, if Powell could have taken the leadership of the Tory party very easily in the day.
Yeah,
if it went to the base, if it went to the party base.
If it went to in the mid 60s, I'm trying to remember if Heath went for the party leadership in 65 or was it 66, but it was round about the mid 60s.
Heath is one of my most hated prime ministers. I hate him.
As my mum said, he seemed like a good idea at the time. That's what my mum's take on it.
I hate Heath is just as bad as Attlee for all the problems we have today.
Yeah. But the thing is that it could have gone either way in the aftermath of the 1964 general election. That between Powell and Heath, and it's interesting, Harold Macmillan had very little time for either of them. He acknowledged Powell's genius, but he said, I can't stand those mad staring eyes boring at me across the cabinet table. And he felt Heath was just like deliberately just misanthropic. And
I don't think Heath knew where he was. He wasn't capable. I don't think he was capable to be prime minister. I think he was very. The Tory party at the time was awful. Again, it's the same problem we probably have today. Probably have coming up with the party now is going to be filled with people who are really outdated.
Well, I've had to talk about outdated people, minions in the party. Rhubba has very kindly pointed me in the direction
Oh, good, that guy.
of a SPAD, SPAD is basically special advisor.
Yeah.
SPADs are basically little street urchins working for the MPs. And this particular street urchin,
You got to realise that that the civil service hiring process, of which I've applied twice, is terrible.
Yeah.
They let literal idiots in just because of where they're from and their racial background.
Yeah. Now
This guy. Yeah, I'll let you finish it, because for me Anyway,
this guy is he's definitely future MP material.
yeah.
I'm not going to use his name because I don't want to start a thing. I've tried to converse with him, but he will not. He will not converse with me at all. And he will, when I leave a comment, he will then put another tweet out where he basically says, "Oh, but just to clarify, I'm not saying we shouldn't be fighting, but I just don't like the violent language that's just coming out from some of the people in the party." Like, oh, fuck off! Really?
My initial so I clashed with him about 6 months ago. I was following him for a brief time.
It's one of these guys who are culture war's not real guy, and he just
he said culture war is not real. So I followed it because he had one or two takes on Brexit that I thought, okay, that sounds interesting, and I thought, okay, so he's a researcher for the party. Maybe I should be.
Like, he's a Harwood type.
Yeah, and I thought he's worse than Harwood. Because I think Harwood is a genial idiot. He's genial. This guy isn't. So what happens? I thought, he's a parliamentary researcher. He might give me some insight on what's going on there. Anyway, what happened was that it was the aftermath of there was when Trump first announced that he was going to come down on big tech over Section 230. So this is about 6 to 12 months ago. And this guy said this was a terrible move, and it will damage the media, and it will damage the corporate structure. And he was in conversation with Jennifer Rubin on this, and they were in lockstep agreement about how awful Trump was. And I wrote to this guy.
Sorry, carry on, Rhubba.
I wrote to this guy and I said, but surely, with all these people being banned off Twitter and being banned on YouTube and the demonetized, and I mentioned the adpocalypse and the demonetization, surely that is more worrying and something needs to be done. And he wrote back to me and said, "Oh, you're one of those Alex Jones loon types. Yeah, nobody's being who's being banned from Twitter? Who's being demonetized on?" And he just
he's a London Tory. He doesn't know. Also, he doesn't use the internet properly. He doesn't know anything beyond Twitter and BBC.
Now, I was a little bit naive because I wrote back and saying, I cited Milo Yiannopoulos and I cited Sargon and I cited
poor decisions.
And basically he looks at those names and just said, Alex Jones loons, the lot of them, and he started doing gifs of what's his name from Evil Dead, the actor from Evil Dead in the tinfoil hat, and he started sending me those gifs of Bruce Campbell in a tinfoil hat.
So, yeah. Rhubba, this guy is what I'd call a BBC staff member. You would know. I'm sure you know from being in the BBC, having worked with them, to some extent, is yes. that they think that anyone not from London is a tinfoil hat wearing racist. And so, for example, what we're doing, I've been catching up a lot on that kind of some of the media side of stuff. I'd be like, because Doctor Who happened, so I've been watching reviews and stuff like that, watching Nerdrotic and all this.
Yeah, Nerdrotic and Balls Trek and just
well, Heels versus Babyface as well. I recommend it. Very good. So they have people in the BBC, right? They actually like those guys are doing some good journalism behind the scenes. No one's noticing in terms of that element of the culture war, because they actually have sources on the inside, including in Lucasfilm with the Doomcock has the Lucasfilm guy, which is insane. But the BBC source, right, said this is unbelievable, right? That in the BBC they still think that they still are convinced they are too right wing, and they're trying to balance out their right wing aspects. I'm just like, what do they think is right wing?
For them, the token right wing voice is Tobias Ellwood, which is insane because Tobias Ellwood is he is for the American listeners, he is the conservative rhino.
So I'm just like, even if you even consider Andrew Neil right wing, there's something that that's more right wing than what you're probably considering right now.
Did you see my tweet from about 2 hours ago where I confronted a guy he just put up a collage said alt-writers in our media, and the alt-writers were Mike Graham, Claire Fox, Lawrence Fox, Darren Grimes.
Lawrence Fox is a metropolitan centre writer. He's not much else.
Lawrence Fox is on a journey, and I wish him all the best.
I like Lawrence Fox.
I like him, but he's on a journey.
I've been thinking, for purely optics terms and stuff in my area, is that I was thinking of running for Reclaim instead of the Tories in my area for the Welsh Assembly, because I think I could win in the Welsh. I reckon I could.
Calvin Dyson, who's just a gem. He's one of my favourites at the moment, because he's got the grace. He can say a lot of things we agree with, but he just does it with good grace. Well, I think Fox is a bit of a pugilist online, but
I think he's quite. I think he gets what he's doing.
Yeah, but the thing is that there were all these people who I would consider various shades of the right. Not a single one of them I would consider alt-right. Darren Grimes. Darren Grimes, for goodness sake.
Darren Grimes is very milquetoast. He seems like a really nice lad, right? Don't get me wrong.
But he's the one that Granny Normie's going to like. Like
the furthest mainstream Tory right wing, the furthest right now I see, which towards our area where the Tories go now, is Maya Tusi.
Possibly,
I would say he's the closest to our end of things, which is acceptable within the establishment of the party, and he's barely acceptable.
We are. I mean, us three would be considered beyond the pale. In fact, we would probably be labelled Nazis.
Oh, look, and the Nazis hate me. So,
well, yeah, we're not racist. We don't like racial politics. End of.
I'm damned on all sides, so I don't care. But the thing is, I challenge this guy. I challenge this left. Okay. Who do you consider mainstream right wing? I mean, we're not talking far right. We're not talking centre right. We're talking straight down the middle. And he said Andrew Neil. And Michael Portillo, and I said I agree with you on that one. But then the other one was he put Julie Burchill, Tom Harwood.
Oh God,
Howard's just a really kind of wannabe shit poster, but you can't do it.
Uh,
And then he labelled Isabel Oakeshott as alt-right.
What planet does that? I mean, what planet is that Muppet on? Oh.
And they just go, come on, Isabel Oakeshott could be Tom Harwood's big sister.
What year is it where alt-right is a term they still use? God.
And I just said, look, you're just lying. It's a slur. And then I was speaking with Powell's Phantom account. I'm not speaking with Powell, but I'm speaking with Powell's Phantom account, which is weird. But he just said he said something like, they're deluded. And I said, no. If they make Tom Harwood the acceptable face of the right, anybody to the right of him becomes unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. So you cannot let.
And Howard's more than Howard is a useful. It could end up being a useful idiot for them.
Yeah.
I think idiot is the operative word, because I don't think you see the difference between this parliamentary researcher and Harwood is that this parliamentary researcher knows what he's doing. He's what I call an infiltrator. Okay,
Yeah.
so he's probably a corporate socialist. So
he's what he is. He's socially progressive, but he believes in the neocon. He believes in the neocon world order.
He's totally the Davos man.
I think his tweet that he has put out is basically reminding everyone that Obama was a terrible. This is like the typical neocon trick. Bash the left and then support then sort of go through the neocon. So what he does is he bashes Obama, saying, worst foreign and domestic policies. Like, foreign policy, I agree with you, but then nothing compares to the gracious period of Bush Jr.
He's a Ramus Army. He loves himself, George Bush Senior.
Yeah, I mean, like Ray Murasami's agreeing with. I mean, like Ray Murasami, her heroes are Theresa May and George Bush.
Yeah, the only live stream I was ever on with Ray was with the ranking the worst prime ministers.
God, she argued that Blair one, didn't she?
No, she argued that Theresa, because we were talking about. Oh no, it segued into the worst conservative leaders of all time.
Edward Heath.
And she put May at the. We all had to do our top 10, and she put May as brilliant, best, fantastic, wonderful. So, and the thing is that with Tom Harwood is that I think he is genuinely gormless. I think he genuinely is led through the nose.
Yeah, I think he is gormless. I mean, because like.
I think he'd if there was a girl on the left, and he would do anything he could.
Yeah, he would be sat next to Grace Blakeney and half thinking, well, my head says she's just spouting nonsense, but dude, she's hot. I think that's.
But I think a lot of it. I mean, like, I think a lot of them, like the.
You might have a girlfriend, but either way. Sorry.
I think like the SPAD that we're on about, and then Tom Harwood and such. I would say who's the other one? The one that does the live stream. The one that was with Dave, I forgot his name. The one that did with David Starkey that got in trouble.
Grimes. No, I give Grimes a pass.
I give Grimes a pass as well. I think he's fine. I think he's where the center of the party is.
Yeah, I think Grimes is okay. I noticed that in his early years he followed the same sort of thing where when the heat has turned up a bit, he sort of seeks the brownie points.
As do many of the people who are in party, because their concern is about ranking up in the party.
And in his case, he's trying to rank up in terms of political YouTubers on the right. However,
he's basically like think of it like a games journalist. A games journalist is always nice to certain studios to get early access to designers and devs and stuff like that to talk to.
However,
he's doing the same thing with MPs. He wants to get access to MPs and access to members of the party and stuff, so he doesn't want to alienate them.
But however, this is where I think Grimes has the advantage, and why I give him a pass over Harwood and over Oakeshott and a few others, is the fact that he has seen the ugly side of the left. They've gone after him, and he has had to go to court twice. So he's seen how nasty the left can get.
Oh yeah,
and I think that's left an impression on. That's given him a bit more fight. I like the fact that he stands his ground. If he thinks he's right, and he thinks he's innocent, he will stand his ground and he will back himself. And I like that. He's got that kind of yes, he weakened over Starkey, but the fact he defended the integrity of his show, his podcast. He stood his ground, and that's why I give him a pass, because they have gone after him. Harwood has never he's never really been gone after. It's always been soft for him. You know, a few people like you know, some people on Newsnight or these talking shows say, "Oh, you know, your Brexit fantasies and all that," but they don't interrupt him. They don't try and get Harwood cancelled. They haven't gone after him personally.
No,
you know, and he hasn't felt that bite that Grimes has.
No. Okay, so we'll get back to. I was going to share my Twitter thread, but I was looking at the time and I thought we'd better crack on with the Cleopatra. So this is the article. Get back to Cleopatra. This is the article, and this is the Independent. I think this is the sort of majority consensus within left-wing circles, and the revisionism aspect is coming from the left. It's one side. It's coming from the left, and it's part of this crazy BAME identity circle joke. That's really what I've seen, and it's complete, and it's actually very reactionary as well. Very reactionary in the style of politics, at least. And so this is what you got. This is from a Biba Kang, and this is the Independent's sort of view on this, I guess. One of the voices.
I used to read the Independent.
We all did at one stage.
Yeah, I used to read this one. So this is what we got. Cleopatra should be played by a black actor, but not just because it might be more historically accurate. Okay, so and it goes. So it's like Lady Gaga.
So he knows it's not historically accurate, but he will.
She
will.
Or she, her, or whatever the pronoun. She didn't give any pronouns, so I can't. I don't know. You need to put your pronouns in your bio.
She knows it's not historically accurate, so she's going to try and justify it in another way. With paying lip service to it.
She thinks she is indoctrinated. Maybe not directly, but with the Black Israelite view. Because you read what she says. Cleopatra should be played by a black actor, but not just because it might be more historically accurate. So she thinks, Cleopatra was a black woman. So she genuinely believes the Black Israelite worldview, like most people today. She's not. I wouldn't say that she's like a pushing like a certain spad. She sort of like an infiltrator. She is effectively the useful idiot in this scenario, and so so again, her entire premise is just a complete complete lie. So it goes into like the article, and like during the start of it was like debate about who should play Cleopatra. You got Lady Gaga, Angelina Jolie, maybe running for the role, but casting for a BAME actor is the only way to achieve anything close to equality within the film industry. So right off the bat, this isn't about telling the story of Cleopatra or anything creative. It's just about ticking an imaginary box for the film industry, and it's about equality within the film industry. That's all it's about. I mean, and that's why. And I've noticed there are certain films which are now released which are basically they're just crap because their story, there is no story. I mean I think the good example is obviously with the latest Star Wars. You had the main protagonist, Rey, who the Mary Sue, where basically she had no character development. She was perfect from the start, and it's like, okay, well, what's the story in it? Where is the trial? Where's the tribulation? Where's the confronting the hero's journey, the very premise of what the story is? And they didn't do it.
All she has to do is nag a grumpy Luke Skywalker. That's what she does.
Yeah, and then they ruined like Luke's. I'm not going to go on a rant for Luke. Yeah, but yeah, basically you have these films which are these cynical know-it-all characters who are
Gen
um,
X's.
Gen X, yeah, basically Gen X on steroids, and the stories there are no stories. It's just it's like a mockumentary. It really is. It's like it's so bizarre. I mean, there was one. Oh, there's one.
People can't write.
I can't remember what film it is because I've just been.
Well,
It's
people
like
can't imagine. That's more the issue.
there's no imagination. There's no imagination because for them it's not about story. It's not about captivating. It's about we need to represent this group. We need to represent that group, and it's so zealous. It's so extreme because there is no quarter. There's no escape. There's no separation of real world politics. It goes back to the old Marxist thing is politics is person, person is politics, and this article and this whole debate, this whole controversy around Cleopatra. It's about achieving this aim of equality within the film industry, which is just pure fantasy. I mean, there is no inequality because
No,
because
the problem is the film industry is much like a market. Is a demand. Is a demand industry. It's based on demand. Like you look at, say, the character of Rose Tico in Star Wars. If we use Star Wars example from, she was created to cater to the Chinese market, and then when they got to China, they found out she was the least popular character because she was ugly, even though the actress herself is not that ugly at all. But she was uglified.
Just put her in a boiler suit with dealy
Yeah.
boppers on her head.
And B, everyone saw right through her and saw her for what she was, which was a token character. You don't go, and they don't go. You don't go to start like the Chinese. See, like I talked to a Chinese. They love The Rock, and they love things like the movie Skyscraper and stuff like that, which in the West didn't do too well, but over there, does amazingly because they want to see beautiful people. That's what they want to see. Like Transformers does amazing over there. Why? They love beautiful people. They love beautiful actors and actresses.
And things exploding.
Yeah.
But the thing is that there's a lot. If you take a look at The Last Jedi, there's a lot going on there. There's pandering to the Chinese market. There's kind of scoring woke points. But I thought one of the most insidious subplots in The Last Jedi, which goes against the entire history of storytelling, is what happens with Poe Dameron in that, because his story arc in it is the futility of individual effort. You see, take one of my favorite films of all time, Rollerball. Is that it's the game is designed to crush the human spirit and to show that there's futility in individual effort, and of course the hero kind of defeats the game in order to prove the opposite. In Poe's case, every idea that he has, which are fairly good ideas, every time he puts himself, his life on the line, his principles on the line,
rewarded.
He's not rewarded. He's slapped down, and he has to.
And by the pink haired.
Because he's the white Rhubba, because he's the white man, and he needs to know what it feels like to be oppressed.
Well, he's Hispanic, but but the thing is. And that's the thing, everybody says that, oh, you white patriot, you white supremacy, you hate people of color. No, give us a character like Poe Dameron and get him to do the things that he did in The Force Awakens. We like him. We don't care about his color. We quite like, in Force Awakens, we quite like Finn as well. We quite liked him. Not as much as Poe, because Poe was just like the inheritor of Han Solo's mantle. Yeah. But, we love Wesley Snipes as Blade. We like Sidney Poitier in practically everything he ever did.
Samuel L. Jackson's Mace Windu. He was brilliant.
But Samuel L. Jackson in a number of roles. We like him.
And then, of course, like the Star Wars, you had, Lando Calrissian.
Yeah, we like him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all of them, good quality. And this is the sad thing with the Star Wars franchise is that it, and Some people have said, "Oh, it's because it's been taken over by Disney." I think it would have happened regardless if Disney had taken over or not. If it's still
it's a fact in the film industry. It's a problem
It's
with
just a
media.
wave that's happened. Yeah.
problem. And what has happened is basically activists who don't care about, and this is what's really sad because Star Wars
Same thing happened in Doctor Who. Activists who don't watch the show ruined it.
took over the they take over it. And this is the problem. So when you have like Star Wars, Doctor Who, where there's like rich lore, like lots of backstories, there can be so many.
It's a show based on its lore, but these activists don't get that because they're there for only one reason, and that's to get their agenda in.
Yeah, and what you've got is you've got this split. I think
that's why I'm here.
This is the thing. When you had the Rise of Skywalker, it's bad when you're rooting for Palpatine. You're just thinking, oh, destroy the fuckers, just end them all.
Look, lads. As you probably as I don't know if you know this, but the reason I'm here and the reason I came into the kind of bubble here is because of The Last Jedi. That really kind of I call it my awakening. It was kind of I sat there. I was in and out for a long time of these circles. I kind of just like dabbing in because I was a Tory anyway. But that back then I was far more establishment. And then eventually I just watched The Last Jedi, and I came out of it, and I just had this horrible feeling, just like I really didn't enjoy that. There's really like hand-fisted messaging. The worst was Admiral Holdo. She literally was SJW lecturer. She reminded me so much of a uni lecturer. Some of the uni lecturers you could see with the pink hair. The post-colonial like they'll tell you about post-colonial
and she coasts on an unearned reputation.
Exactly. Like, I don't know who you are, and you're telling all these guys off.
Yeah, and her strategy is just to gradually whittle down the fleet to nothing.
And you're sat there, and just like they just killed off Admiral Akbar off screen.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, what? I'm just like that should be Admiral Akbar there as the second in command, who is doing all this. What Holdo's doing, she shouldn't even be in the film. She doesn't have a right to exist in the universe. It shouldn't be.
And that's the thing. They basically forced their perfect characters. I guess you could say they're sort of SJW characters into the Star Wars universe, and just sort of started Game of Thronesing, killing off all of the important characters who have and this is the crazy thing. Like in Return of the Jedi. You got like Palpatine when he walks off the ship, and he has like those like 3 advisors behind him. They don't say a thing. You only see them for like a few seconds, but they all have names and they all have backstories, and it's like all lore. I mean, this is the crazy thing that a lot of them don't realize about the lore of Star Wars. It is so expansive. I mean, they got the expanded universe as well. I mean,
so deep,
so expansive.
Even if you go back to the very first one made. Which I still call Star Wars. I still can't get.
You're of that age.
I'm of that age. It's Star Wars. But every character in the Mos Eisley canteen has a name and a backstory.
Yes.
Yeah, Greedo, mate.
Yeah, there's Greedo, but also the band leader is called Finger and Dan. The guy, the human pilot. Obi-Wan talks to first, who turns down the job but recommends Solo, has a name and a backstory.
Cool.
It's never established whether he's a human or an alien or just disfigured, but the guy gets his arm cut off.
The alien called a Bothian. I think it's a Bothian or something like that.
But I discovered that the guy, and he's mumbling something. You can't hear what he says, but he's talking to Obi-Wan at the bar, and he points to Solo. And there's this whole backstory about why he turned down the job from Obi-Wan and recommended Solo. This is huge stuff, and it's in the expanded lore. But that's because I think George Lucas is a little bit on the spectrum, and just whereas another director. There's a great book called Easy Rider Raging Bulls, which is about George Lucas's era of film directing. I think
Lucas was heavily inspired by Tolkien, right? And even though he did a sci-fi, his one love was he desperately wanted to do Lord of the Rings.
I know that Alec Guinness helped in the script with the first Star Wars film, slightly in like the dialogue and such. Because one thing that I know, one thing that I think, and this is where I think why the Chinese market didn't like Star Wars, and I think where it's very prominent in the West, is that in many purposes, it could be a Greek. If take away the sci-fi elements and everything, it could be a Greek Odyssey. It could be like an Odyssey.
It's an Odyssey, just like Lord of the Rings is an Odyssey. It's the Fellowship.
And
I still think
and this is why I hate the sequel. I mean, forget like the SJWs and all the bullshit that comes with the new films, the 3 new films, which for me, in my mind, aren't canon. And I hope they get retconned as soon as possible by Filoni and co. But I'm not holding any hope for that. But one thing that I dislike is that the premise of Star Wars, whether you like it or not, and it always will be, is it's a story about Anakin Skywalker and his redemption.
And his son.
And his son, yeah. It's the Skywalker family. And one thing that I mean, when you watch episode 1 to episode 6, you see that the sort of thing where you have this.
And I don't think the biggest take I think from this, I think would be a good place to go with it to end it is with who is the last person standing in the Star Wars story now after the sequel trilogy. What lineage is she's from? She's not a Skywalker, even though she took the name on. She's a Palpatine. The Emperor wins in the end because his blood is the one who is taken over the Skywalker legacy and everything.
Yeah, but that just sums up the act. I mean,
which is an insult.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing where you have the this. And this is where I think it suits quite well with modern society, because you think about George. I mean, I'm going to bring George Floyd into this now. Think about the type of person that he is, or was, I should say.
Yeah.
Just think about it. He wasn't an upstanding citizen. I mean, he was a guy who was not just a drug user, but he robbed a pregnant woman at knife point. Was it knife or gunpoint? One of the two.
Knife point.
It's one of the two. But he actually physically assaulted her as well.
Yeah, he physically assaulted her. He had a long rap sheet of assaulting people, and he was treated as a saint. I mean, this is a guy that was treated as a saint. And then you had Vera Lynn, who was, for those who don't know, she was during the Second World War, she was a singer, and she raised the morale of troops around the various campaign theatres, whether it was in the Far East or Europe. And she was a very popular British musician. And she was very important to
British culture.
British culture, yeah, especially the post-war culture. Very important indeed.
Well, she's the voice of the war in our country. She basically, if you think of music, you think of Vera Lynn for the war music.
Yes. We Meet Again and that. And what you had was the BBC did a full goddamn coverage of George Floyd's funeral, and they didn't even do Vera Lynn's funeral. That's your problem. When you see Palpatine, winning in the end, it is because the people who are in control of the culture, the left in control of the culture, they are inherently evil. And when I say evil, and I know the Britishers had a bit of a dig at me today because of talking about Blair and evil and everything else, it's how they come to their conclusions. Because what they do is ultimately they idolize evil. They idolize everything that is selfish, inward-looking, and
expedient.
And that's where the problem,
because they're addicted to the here and now.
Yeah, and that's where it gets to here and now. And then the same thing with Cleopatra. I mean, they don't want it because it's historically accurate. They don't calculate their story. It's about how they feel. It's about how these goddamn fucking pathetic arseholes feel. And
that's what happens when you have no understanding of what you are and where you've come from.
Exactly.
I think understanding of history whatsoever.
There's a lot of narcissism and vanity that underpins people like Blair and people on the left in general. The huge amount of vanity, and it's because they don't feel like they're part of the great chain of being.
Yes.
And if you contrast Tony Blair with another leader, somebody who wasn't that successful as a prime minister, but he was a successful leader, the Duke of Wellington.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is that you look at the Duke of Wellington and how his life panned out compared to his almost exact contemporary Napoleon Bonaparte. And that is because the Duke of Wellington never saw power as a means to an end. He saw duty as his primary goal in life.
In Britain, that was the idea. Is duty was the primary goal always.
And
duty to your family was the main thing, then duty to your queen, and then your country.
Yeah.
And I hold up the Duke of Wellington as the archetypal British person, because he has that Anglo-Irish background. But the thing is that his concept, it would never have occurred to him, either as a general or as prime minister, to usurp the king and claim all powers to himself. Never crossed his mind.
No.
Because that doesn't that is not his motivation in life. And when you start, when you put, say, either God at the center of your life, or your duty to your country or to your queen, or you put a higher thing and you are subservient to that, then I think that gives you a good perspective on history, on the great chain of being, and I think you look at things more honestly. When you're somebody like Blair, a lot of these people on the left, they're not beholden to anyone. They don't acknowledge.
They're purely expedient because they're morally selfish naturally. They only want to appear selfless for their own moral well-being.
So when you're not answerable to anything, anyone, or any sense of duty or to the truth or anything like that, you can rewrite history. It's easy. You just rewrite it to suit yourself because you feel no obligation to tell the truth. You feel no obligation to accept reality. This is a blatant plug here. This is what I'm going to do a video on this. Part of Get Real is my Get Real drive. It's all about, no, you look at history, and this is what we've been doing tonight. We've looked at certain bits of history and go, well, here's a theory, here's some information. Let's not discount any of the facts. Let's take it all on board. Like when you were saying about the Justinian plague. Well, here is a possible answer to a question, but we consider it. We consider that information. We weigh it up. We analyze whether it holds water or not, and we don't discount the facts. It's what Marxist history does. Is it disregards facts that don't fit narratives, and that's what we're seeing.
One of the biggest ones that you hear about Marxists is that you hear the word colonizer thrown about every 5 seconds, and I will ask, I guess, Owain or Rhubba, maybe. Could you explain to the people who'll be watching this, where does the origin of the word colony or colonizer come from?
Oh God,
what the literal definition or their definition?
The literal definition, because their definition is unimportant because that's not real They take the definition from the original definition. I mean, I like this. I mean, it's the Roman for colonna, isn't it? Really.
Which is you'll have to fill me out.
It's basically town, and so.
All right. Yes. I thought
basically the invention of town. So like you take Roman Britain, Colchester, London, York, or wherever York was called. I can't remember what York was called.
Abraham.
Thank you. Yeah. And Chester and Lord Eck.
Caerleon.
Yeah. And Bath and such. So so this was Bath. Sorry,
that's Bath. Aquasilis is Bath.
Oh, what Aquasilis? Yeah.
I know Duo-Vernum is Canterbury.
Yeah, and what was Colchester?
Camla-Dunham.
That was because that was the capital of Romana Britain, wasn't it? So
I get this all from Asterix in Britain, where they have the rugby match between Camla-Dunham and Duo-Vernum, which would be Colchester versus Canterbury.
Is that an alternate history where Roman industrialized or something like that? I don't know.
No.
All right.
It's just very, very silly puns.
Oh, Asterix.
Asterix,
yeah. I know.
But basically, the concept of colonialism, of what a colony is basically to build a town on conquered land, and it's filled with people from said nation, maybe even some culturally converted, and that's basically what it is. And then so and then you have the modern day Marxist, and they'll say, "Oh, Britain's colonization of India, Britain's colonization of Pakistan, Britain's
We didn't colonize India or Pakistan.
Yeah. And so what you have is you have the Marxists who deliberately mislead the difference between imperialism,
We managed.
yes, and colonization. Now, and I'm going to say something which will probably be there'll be some that might disagree with this, but I don't think you could argue that the first phase of the quote unquote colonization of what would become the 13 colonies was actually colonization, because the first settlements like Jamestown and Plymouth were not built upon
Settled land.
land. No.
But yeah, now the thing is here with the question of that, right? The Native Americans, because they were nomadic tribes. This is where the complication comes in, because what land did they technically own and what didn't they? I understand they had sacred land, and I understand that's kind of in their way ownership. And like you had the 5 tribes of in the Iroquois and stuff like that, who were very advanced actually civically. They were civically extremely advanced, but they for some reason they had no tech. That was the odd thing about the Iroquois. Like, civically, they had parliament. They had a parliament, more or less. They had the Grand Hut, which was functioned like a parliament, which was quite interesting. And it's a really interesting form of government. I'd look into the government of the 5 tribes. But also then, but yeah, they didn't really own, say, but Manhattan Island was sacred, I believe, to them.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that was settled by the Dutch. Not our problem. I think the term colonizer, that was one which is quite an interesting one, because they like is India and everything. It's like, okay, well,
it doesn't work. It doesn't really work in Africa either. We didn't colonize Africa. We only colonized South Africa.
No, I mean, what?
Really?
No, I mean, like, you could argue that there may be a few cities like in Zimbabwe.
Rhodesia, yeah, we forget about
Rhodesia, and Uganda, and Kenya, where there were westernized built cities, but it wasn't like you had mass migration or immigration from.
Not in the American example. Nowhere near the American example. Again, this is another Americanized philosophy. They're bringing on how the Manifest Destiny. They think that all colonization was like Manifest Destiny, which it was not.
Yeah. That's a big Americanization, and it's really misleading, because that's not.
The British didn't care who lived within the land. All they wanted to do was build a railway from the Cape to Cairo.
Yeah, that's basically all they cared about. And same with India. Usually the Brits living in India during the height of the empire were either soldiers or political civil servants, and maybe and then merchants.
Well, the Rajas, it's called the British Raj because technically they were still Rajas. The Indians still had a lot of autonomy locally.
Yeah,
because they just had to swear allegiance to the crown because she was the empress.
The empress, the queen, or king was empress or
emperor. Yeah, so it's and that was only because the East India Company effed up.
Yeah, and the civil service after the East India Company messed up, the civil service bought up the remaining shares.
Yeah,
I don't know how much they bought India for. I was it like 5 shillings or something like that? Something ridiculous like that.
It's just it's something like that. Anyway, history is full of nuances, and the way we teach and think about history today doesn't take into account the nuances anymore.
And one thing, just one final point on the Marxist bit is, you have to remember a lot of the stuff written about empires was written post Second World War, and a lot of them as well. Oh yeah, First World War, Second World War, but a lot of the some of the a lot of the post Second World War anti-imperial, anti-colonialistic sentiment came from Marxist thought,
I think
and what you had was literature produced by these people who have this sort of anti-Marxist theory, and then what you had was I guess you could say the sort of first
yeah, see,
myths of like the British Empire. So
let
like,
me let me give you a lot of this is to do to again American philosopher, American pressure to end the empire. I want to say something which will probably be quite controversial to many. I think the worst thing the Americans ever did was force the collapse of the British Empire and the disillusionment.
Oh, that's interesting. There was a thing that Ben Shapiro put out 2 weeks ago, where he was asked to rate various American presidents in terms of greatness, and everybody assumed he put Eisenhower in the top bracket. He put Eisenhower in the second worst bracket.
Yeah, let the British Empire die.
Because he said, and Shapiro said, because Eisenhower should have backed Britain and France in the Suez Crisis.
Well, he's Israeli. He would say that.
But I was just thinking, yes, somebody said it. Somebody had to say it. Because I'm sick and tired of the narrative. This is a great example of how history is being rewritten. That the reasons for the military intervention in the Suez from Britain and France was absolutely sound. If you have a look at the reports at the time, what was going on at the time, everybody forget, they brush aside who NASA was. NASA was a puppet of the Soviet Union in that region. The occupation of the Suez Canal was illegal because it, rather than being a colonial possession, it was private property. It was owned by a corporation.
Yep. A French British corporation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who built the bloody thing in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
What did it for the British and the French was that they took a couple of months to assemble the task force. It wasn't like the Falklands '82. The day after.
Imagine the Suez Crisis had been over immediately. It just been
the task force, which would have been immense, because there's probably the size of the British military in the 1950s was at its peak.
You had things. So you had national service back then as well.
We had national service. We had about 5 aircraft carriers.
Still had a navy.
And then the French had 3 of their own. So it was and the Israelis chip in as well. So it's a sizable force that goes in. But
people don't remember as well. It's like Israel was part of the British Empire for a long time, for a fair few years, and the Palestinian Protectorate was a thing that did happen at one point, which was the intermediary stage of Israel. I
also feel that sometimes in *56. That was David Ben-Gurion's way of saying sorry to Britain for being such an asshole in 1948. With the Haganah and the Irgun committing terrorist acts.
Yeah, it's like when the war's over, we were going to give them their own country anyway. We weren't going to keep.
You didn't have to blow up the King David Hotel, for goodness' sake.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we dithered, but that was partly due to the Eisenhower administration, and particularly the Dulles brothers. One was the CIA director, one was the Secretary of State, I believe.
Oil. They wanted British oil because they didn't like what we were doing in Persia at the time,
and forcing us to decolonize and all that. And one of the Dulles brothers and Eisenhower, based on Eisenhower's relationship with Harold Macmillan. Macmillan was the foreign secretary at the time. And he was felt, oh, you're close to Ike from your wartime days, so you'll put our case to him. And the Eisenhower administration sent mixed messages. And then, as the task force was just about to hit Egypt, then the Eisenhower administration pulls the rug from under Britain's feet. And what we've had since is the kind of the lefty narrative on Suez. We always call it the Suez disaster. or
Suez crisis.
Suez crisis, Suez disaster, and no mention is made of Nasser, who tried to set up a little empire of his own. He's trying to set up a pan-Arab
empire,
empire under the support of the Soviet Union. So that barely gets mentioned.
Yeah.
And
so the end of the British Empire was a mistake. I think I want to say that. It's quite controversial for many, but I think that what it was at that point was not, the empire of slavery or whatever people want to think it was. It was not an empire which was genociding blacks or anything like that in Africa. No. This is the empire that produced Rhodesia. This is the empire that defended black rights in South Africa against Boer. So this is not, again, lots of the narratives confused it, and to the point where I think, honestly, one of the biggest mistakes of American foreign policy in the 20th century was being anti-British Empire, not anti, because if you notice, France got to keep all their colonies, and they slowly gave them away. Like, no, they haven't all of them because they still have French Guiana and the other parts.
I think a lot of it comes down to the Kennedys, and I think, like
the Irish.
Yeah, I think. I mean, we'll finish this up.
I blame the Irish for a lot.
Yeah. To finish this up, I mean, I might reference Biden as well towards the end here, but because there's some similarities. But you have to remember with the Kennedys, and especially JFK's father, which was it Joe Kennedy?
Joseph Kennedy Sr. Yeah.
Joseph Kennedy Sr. He was during World War II. He was an ambassador to the UK, and
he wanted to leave us to die.
Yeah, and he told FDR that Britain would fall within a matter of weeks. This was after Dunkirk. He was convinced that the Operation Sea Lion would happen really soon as Britain would fall and everything else. And of course, he didn't take into account the British Air Force or anything. And he was very anti-British. He was very anti-British chap because of the Irish, the magical plastic Irish nationalism that goes on in America. And I think you go fast forward to JFK. I think a lot of decolonization efforts and the UN rulings and everything else, I think a lot of it came from, I think it coincided conveniently with the Kennedy family.
The process had started under Eisenhower, and more directly with Eisenhower's underlings, like the Dulles brothers. It's weird. I find JFK kind of he seems like a man torn, because during that time, when he was 17 years old and he was living in Britain, he was finishing school. He actually wrote a book called While Britain Slept, which is a criticism of appeasement.
JFK wasn't so anti-Britain.
And JFK clashed with his father over this. He said, "How dare you write that book, son?" And because JFK was not the favorite son of Joseph Kennedy. No. Joseph Kennedy Sr., but he was killed on a bombing raid in World War II. Robert was seen as a kind of favorite. JFK, I think he genuinely liked Britain. He genuinely liked Harold Macmillan. Of course, but I think the process of decolonization and America's foreign policy had already been set by the time
as we know,
became president.
It's one hell of a thing.
And I don't think JFK could even derail it, but his liberal side would have wanted decolonization to happen. But I think he wanted it. He didn't want Britain to fall hard. He didn't want. He wanted some kind of cushion for us. Mind you, we couldn't afford to keep the place.
No, we couldn't. We're running everything at loss. So
I think we should have kept. We should have kept the Suez. Just focus on a few things like Singapore, Suez, Hong Kong.
Suez, Hong Kong. I would have try and focus a lot on kind of reforming South Africa
Yeah.
into a proper dominion.
Mm.
Held on to the Caribbean stuff a bit more. Possibly held on to like places like Qatar.
Belize.
Belize actually was more of a success story, because
I
they
know
didn't
that
they
story.
didn't get decolonized until 1972, and it was a case where Britain and it was called British Honduras at the time. They actually kind of sat down and worked out what the kind of post decolonization settlement would be, and then Belize had a existential threat. I think it was Guatemala wanted to invade them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's kind of so Belize has never been kind of moany anti-British and trying to rewrite the narrative, because they know we're going to back them up if Guatemala or any of the other neighboring Latin American nations try anything.
Oh yeah, we have. I think they keep the Queen there for a reason.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think the Caribbean is more of a success story than Africa.
Yes.
To an extent, yeah.
To an extent, yes. There's always caveats with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more success story.
Like Rhodesia is the greatest fall from grace ever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
God.
I think a lot of it is down to the.
Imagine going to a person in like the 1910s and say, yeah, you know that Rhodesia, which is booming, it's going to become a hellhole by 100 years' time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the.
It couldn't have been handled worse. That period between 1960 and 1980 couldn't have been handled worse.
Yeah, I mean, the only good thing, I know that with called Rhodesia, with Zimbabwe now, is that they are inviting white farmers back, and there's attempts to right wrongs and move beyond Mugabeism. But the problem is now the Mugabeism has spread to South Africa itself, and
yeah, but Botswana's reaping all the benefits.
yeah. And that's the problem. That's
like, how do you end up in a scenario where Botswana is the most prosperous and one of the most prosperous and safest nations in Africa when it's landlocked in between Zimbabwe and South Africa?
They don't tolerate Marxists.
Yeah, they don't. The guy who founded the Botswanan Constitution was one hell of a based bloke.
Yeah,
he was a great guy. I think when he talks about some real black heroes, he is one of the up there with the top. I think
the other thing about.
Is it Adi? I can't remember.
But the thing about I noticed with Botswana in the culture is that they don't have the politics of envy. There's no kind of they know where they're at in the world, and they don't. They never kind of go around blaming other people. They seem to be quite content with the level they're at, and they're working towards something a little bit better, but it's always within their grasp.
What's the guy's? Is it? It's not. I'm trying to think. Is it Seretse Khama? I can't remember. It might be that guy. It might be Seretse Khama. He's pretty. Everywhere he was when he did it, he was pretty based, and he did some. And he was like apparently was like a member of like the Adam Smith Institute and all that.
Yeah,
because he was London educated. Botswana is an interesting story. It was never technically fully integrated into the empire. It was always just a protectorate.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
There was a huge thing in the early 60s. There was this plan to create a confederation in that region with Zimbabwe, what was called Northern Rhodesia, Botswana. The previous name was Nyasaland. I think it was Botswana's previous name.
Ausland or something like that, because it was a German. I don't know.
And there was this idea of creating a kind of Swiss-style confederacy where each country was dependent on a thing the other one could provide, and the plan just absolutely collapsed, partly because of Chinese-backed Marxists in the region,
and the apartheid, of course.
The apartheid and Ian Smith being very stubborn at the time, which he was famous for.
Yeah. So
Alright.
I guess Paul, we'll just finish it up here.
Hmm.
Thank you both for coming on.
Oh no, thank you for hosting as always.
That's
Good.
all right.
It's good.
I promised. I see, Robert. I know that I've talked about the what was it that stream I was planning to do, which was between the factions within the right wing.
Yes.
Now, the reason I haven't done it, and there's method in my madness, it's because I'm waiting to see what happens tomorrow in America, and looking at what's happening, because obviously got I believe that tomorrow is the certification, the official certification where Pence certifies the electoral college votes. There's Republican at the moment in America. You got GOP senators who are saying they're not going to certify.
I'm starting to think Trump may refuse to leave. I'm actually thinking of it. I'm thinking about it now.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and
yeah, it's certainly not played out. Yeah.
No,
well, he's tried every legal avenue, and what he'll do now, he will try every legal avenue, and that means every legal avenue. So
yeah, I think he will. And also, I think one thing that I'm thinking of is significant is that I think if it goes wrong tomorrow, and if it does go wrong overall, I mean, depending on what happens, I think America as a world power, post-war world power, could cease tomorrow, or tomorrow could be the start of its undoing.
And then begins Kansas. Then we're kind of like left with like, okay, we have to do Kansas UK. That's the only alternative we're left with.
I mean, there will the darkest point would be America descends and is no longer a world superpower.
We'll be left with the EU and China.
Yeah, it was just America will follow China's lead on everything.
Yeah,
that is the.
And so, what you could only hope for would be, unironically, a Kansas UK / Commonwealth, and I think we could get. I think with Kansas UK, we could get like India in as a like.
It'll become a Kansas India kind of power,
definitely. The Australians, because the Australians are on point. You know, the Australians have got the Chinese backs up.
Same India. I mean, India is on point with China. They know China's massive.
This is why when push comes to shove, Britain will probably go against what the EU and China are trying to pull, because we got India and Australia. The only red herring is Canada, which is big pro China, but they'll eventually have to come into the fold somehow. Canada will integrate themselves. I don't think Canada will be about in 30 years. I think there'll be British Columbia, Quebec, and Canada with whatever remnants are left of it.
I also think that when we're talking about the factions of the right, we've seen the last 12 months the right really fracture into, and I think now or in the next couple of weeks we will see the factions kind of crystallize, because for a lot of us we were kind of buffeted from one point to another. I mean, I've 2020, I went on this kind of bizarre journey on the right without me changing my politics fundamentally. I just felt like I was the subject of a custody battle at one stage, and I feel like I've kind of fallen in with a faction that I would call the pragmatists. So that's me. Online, you would know it as me, Gammon, Vanishing Point, to a certain extent, Conservative Rebuttal. Although he's the wild card in this.
He's always a wild. He's a wild card. I never understand Conservative Rebuttal.
But certainly, me and Gammon are pretty much in lockstep on most things. Vanishing Point as well, to a certain extent, and so we've kind of like solidified into this group. Maybe Teabag as well, I would include in that. Although if I'm mislabeling Teabag, I'm sorry. But you know what I mean. We're the kind of, we want to look at things brutally, and sometimes we will not follow a narrative. We just kind of go, well, that's where the cards have laid. and so let's make the most of what is in front of us. And then you've got other factions. You've still got groypers who are not convinced are on the right, but for arguments purposes, let's say they are. We've got a lot of people in the middle still trying to figure out where they are. We've got the cucks, the Proseccos, the infiltrators, the based, the Hitchinsites, the Delingpole faction, and it's all kind of...
Delingpole's got it. Like I don't even know what Delingpole is anymore. I just don't. I like him, but I just don't know
I like
where
him.
he stands.
Put it this way: given a choice, would I rather have a pint with Peter Hitchens or James Delingpole? James Delingpole every time.
Same here. Yeah. Actually,
so I like him as a person, but I think he has always been a kind of passionate, visceral type of person.
He's a very genuine bloke, and he is what he says he is.
What we're seeing is a man with no internal monologue, just putting out his fears for public consumption. But that when he was on the Andrew Neil show, and Andrew Neil likes James Delingpole as a person, but when Delingpole went on his show to be interviewed and had no facts, he just didn't research, he didn't come armed or prepared, and he came unstuck. That's James Delingpole. He speaks from the gut. He is a visceral person. Yeah. And whereas, and Andrew Neil said that, and he says, contrast with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who had just absolutely swatted up the night before, or William Hague, or somebody like that, who absolutely...
Mogg's a natural academic, though, isn't he? So
yeah, and Delingpole isn't. So that's why I just say, "Oh, James, you're doing it again." But at the same time, I like the guy. I just think he's and what he says isn't without merit. It's something that he says a lot of things that I think should be discussed anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Delingpole's, I think he's kind of like the lighthouse of where everything's where conversation's gonna move.
Yeah.
He's the beak, he's the first. He's the first one. He's the vanguard.
And I got somebody's name wrong. I meant Calvin Robinson, not Calvin Dyson. Calvin Dyson is a Bond reviewer. He reviews James Bond films and spy films. Calvin Robinson is the guy with the 70s afro who I really like. I think he's a very good commentator.
Right. Yeah, I've seen him about a bit. Yeah, he's quite good.
Should we end up AI? I'm tired.
Yeah. I was going to say we're all a bit tired. Yeah, so basically my final statement on all of this is obviously, history revisionists. Just keep on fighting them, confront them, because I've done that today and I haven't had a response back from one of them. She's sort of given up, I think. So that's cool. Got nothing back from them, so keep on fighting them. Also, I would say to somebody, because I know some of the Americans who follow me watch this, if you're going to Washington, D.C. tomorrow, just be careful. And remember that, Sun Tzu, Art of War, one quote that sticks out to me is, everything is a deception. Or all wars are deception. And so there's going to be a lot of deception tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of shenanigans and sneakiness. And don't fall for it. When something happens, think through logically. Don't just react to it quickly and go in gun ho or with a cavalier attitude. Just remember to step back and reflect. And so that's my final message on that. But thank you both for coming on, and thank you for the people who tuned in tonight. On Friday, I'm going to be streaming with Plantagenet. We're going to be going through the English Civil War.
Fun.
Which should be quite fun, indeed.
Tell me how my you'll be learning about my ancestor.
Your ancestor, yeah. Oh, no doubt. I've been reading up a book on your ancestor, and it's in preparation for all this, so it should be quite good. I'll link it on my Twitter and such.
I remember when I first went to Parliament, I had a selfie with Cromwell. I just said Uncle Cromwell.
Yeah. And so yes, that's what I got coming up on Friday. And then next week I got hopefully I got Tailed. I got Tailed feature and Harrion next week. So Blob watch, which could be like just normal news. That's gonna be like normal news for that week. And then
Wherever we're on, we just go on big tangents.
yeah. Yeah. But no, I think tonight's stream's been all right. But yeah, thank you for coming on, and I will see you guys.